Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. I'll see you in the morning, Mom. Misty Morse never spoke to her mother again after making that unfulfilled promise. What would motivate someone to take such action? How will Misty Morse never spoke to her mother again? Now is the time to start looking for answers. On April 10, 1978, Misty April Morse was born in Springfield, Ohio. When her family finally relocated to Indian Harbor Beach, Florida, it was a significant turning point in her life and gave her the opportunity to develop and discover new interests. Misty had an exciting and adventurous childhood in the Sunshine State, but when her parents divorced in 1996, her life took a dramatic turn. Misty and her mother, Linda, moved to a new house in Brevard County following the divorce. She stayed close to her father in spite of the change. Misty found work at a number of local bars and clubs during her late teens and early 20s, working a variety of jobs to make ends meet. After some time, she made the decision to continue her education and enrolled in a nearby college. Misty was characterized by friends as an adventurous, carefree young lady who never took life too seriously. When Misty got home from work early on July 22, 2000, she started preparing for a night out with a friend. Linda, her mother, was also up, getting ready for her 3 a.m. shift. Misty got a few brief phone calls while she was chatting with her mother. Misty promised to see her in the morning, as she said goodbye after the call. She had no idea that this would be her final farewell. Misty wasn't home the following morning when her mother got home. At first, she didn't give it much thought, assuming Misty must have spent the night at a friend's house. Misty had not returned or gotten in touch after another day. Her mother started calling Misty a lot out of concern. Misty rarely checked in, especially if she was going to be gone for a day or two. Fearing that no one had seen or spoken to her, her mother contacted Misty's friends and then her father. The more days went by, the more she worried. A retired judge went for a peaceful walk on July 24, 2000, to see how his boat, which was moored in the lagoon behind his house, was doing. He had no idea that a somber discovery would soon upend this serene moment. He was walking along the wooden dock when he noticed an odd object floating in the water below. His eyes widened in surprise as he leaned in to get a better look. When he followed the strong odor to the edge of his property, he initially believed he had discovered a dead manatee that had washed up in his backyard. Then, to his surprise, he soon discovered that it was a young woman's body. The man, appalled, hurried back to his home, picked up his phone, and dialed 911 telephone. Upon their prompt arrival, Brevard County Sheriff's Office officers immediately began their investigation. They observed that the body was in a highly decomposed state, indicating that the woman had been dead for a number of days. Her death was clearly not a coincidence. A marine rope was used to tie her hands and feet, with elaborate knots holding her wrists to her ankles, and white duct tape was used to firmly bind her mouth, eyes, and neck. Rolls of spline, a rubbery black substance, held the Publix plastic grocery bags strapped around her body. To sink the body, investigators thought these bags might have been weighted with sand or rocks. Due to the body's decomposition, detectives were unable to find any clues along the shoreline, including a wallet, phone, or purse that could be used to identify her. Medical examiners suspected asphyxiation but were unable to determine the cause of death. After that, investigators looked for any recent missing persons reports that might be related to the unnamed woman, but they were unable to find anything. The police had not yet been notified of Misty's disappearance. Finally, they attempted fingerprinting. She was eventually identified through the database after forensic specialists used a technique known as degloving to lift fingerprints despite the skin's deterioration. Officers called Misty's mother, Linda, to break the terrible news after verifying the identity of the body. The harsh reality of her daughter's fate completely broke Linda's heart. Her voice trembled and broke into screams of anguish as she called a family friend, her grief echoing in every word. Investigators later showed up at Linda's house to conduct an interview. She tried her best to relive those last moments, now permanently altered by loss, as she described the events of the last night she saw Misty, her voice laden with grief. Although Misty had not disclosed her intended date for the evening, Linda saw her daughter's casual attire and deduced that Misty was probably meeting someone with whom she was totally at ease and with whom she didn't feel the need to impress. Linda remembered that early on July 20, Misty got 2 calls, Investigators quickly subpoenaed Misty's phone records just before she left, but in 2000, it could take weeks to get such information back. They continued interviewing Misty's closest friends and co-workers in the interim. Brought up the possibility that Misty was pregnant, which investigators couldn't ignore as a possible lead. Was her pregnancy a contributing factor? Linda also provided some names to the authorities, including Teddy Underwood, Misty's boyfriend. Investigators questioned whether Teddy might have reacted negatively to the news of Misty's potential pregnancy, given that they had only been dating for 2 months at the time. When Teddy was brought in for interrogation, it soon became clear that he didn't think their relationship was serious. Additionally, he stated that he was unsure if Misty was pregnant. He gave an alibi for the early hours of July 20 by claiming to be at work, which investigators subsequently verified, exonerating him from suspicion. The intricate knots that bound Misty's body caught the attention of detectives as they combed through the crime scene's evidence. This degree of specificity implied that the murderer may have had knot-tying experience, which made them think about careers as a Coast Guard member, a boat captain, or a person with Navy training. They hoped that this clue would bring them one step closer to the truth. Misty's hands and legs were tied with a rope that featured a cow-hitched knot, which isn't something that most people are familiar with. Investigators focused on the numerous layers of tape that were wrapped around the victim's hands, limbs, and face. She had a hat on. Her freedom of movement was limited. The head had tape wrapped around it. She was under control. She was tied up and bound. Despite having the appearance of duct tape, this tape was unique because it was white instead of the usual metallic gray. Because white duct tape was so uncommon at the time, the authorities were more interested. Their hopes were dashed when no trace evidence, such as DNA or fingerprints, turned up on the tape's adhesive. Another dead end, it seemed. They then discovered a few short black hairs adhered to the tape, almost by accident. Given that the victim's hair was a distinctive shade of brown with a hint of red, the detectives knew these couldn't be hers. This finding raised the possibility that the hairs belonged to the murderer. All of the evidence was sent for testing after the crime scene was carefully examined. Unfortunately, this lead could not be fully pursued in 2000 due to the lack of precise DNA analysis technology. As they met with the medical examiner the following day to discuss the autopsy results, their frustration increased. The body had been submerged for less than 72 hours, according to the examiner's report. However, it was impossible to determine the precise cause of death due to exposure to the weather. There were no visible signs of trauma, no broken bones, and no gunshot wounds. Detectives were left with two terrifying options. Either the victim had been thrown into the water while still alive, or the tape covering her mouth and nose had strangled or suffocated her. In an effort to reduce the number of suspects on their list, investigators continued to interview people. Linda recommended that they investigate Bobby Cooper, whom Misty had recently met at a house party. Given that Bobby had visited their house only a few days prior to Misty's passing, Linda was especially wary of him. Bobby, though, was promptly disqualified as a suspect. He didn't match the murderer's description. He didn't own a boat, he hadn't been in the military, and he had no criminal history. Bobby's interview, however, proved to be a pivotal moment in the investigation. Brent Huck, Misty's ex-boyfriend, gave the detectives a name that appeared to fit the profile they were looking for, even though he wasn't the murderer. Investigators tracked down Brent Huck, who resided on South Merritt Island, just south of the location where Misty's body was found. After receiving a tip from Bobby Cooper, Brent accepted their invitation to participate in an interview. Brent disclosed in the interview that he was a charter boat captain and that he was from a wealthy family. He also acknowledged having been a member of the Navy SEALs. Brent acknowledged that he had kept up his relationship with Misty after their breakup, even though he was now in a new one. Brent admitted that he was the likely father of Misty and that he had spoken to her the night before she vanished in the early hours of July 20, 2000. He also acknowledged that he knew she was pregnant. Brent was a prime suspect because of his background as a former Navy SEAL and charter boat captain, his relationship with Misty, and his contemptuous demeanor during the interview. After that, Brent gave the authorities permission to search his house. When investigators arrived, they saw a Rottweiler with short black hair that matched the duct tape that was used to bind Misty. According to Brent, Misty gave him the dog as a gift. A roll of rubber spline, which is usually used to weatherproof windows, was found during their search, an odd item for a home. Red flags were raised by this and other items discovered in Brent's bedroom and kitchen that matched evidence from the crime scene, such as white duct tape and Publix bags. Outside, Brent gave officers permission to search a boat he claimed was his, which was anchored in the nearby waterway. They discovered matted hair next to a fishing rod holder and 2 hair strands on the floor. The boat's ropes were identical to the kind that were used to restrain Misty. When investigators questioned Brent after gathering the evidence, he said something startling. There couldn't be an explanation for a woman tied up and thrown in the river. He was further implicated by this statement, which disclosed knowledge of information that had not yet been made public. The state attorney was reluctant to file charges because, in his opinion, the circumstantial evidence was not strong enough. He maintained that commonplace supplies like rubber spline, rope, and duct tape could be found anywhere, and that Misty's hair on the boat might just indicate that she had paid Brent a visit. Both the investigators and Misty's family were extremely frustrated by this setback. Authorities persisted in their investigation in the hopes of a break, unfazed. Pet DNA became admissible in court in 2002 after a landmark decision in a California case. The black dog hair discovered on the duct tape was compared to Brent's dog's DNA by investigators, and the results verified that they were a match. The state attorney's office decided to move forward with the prosecution after receiving this crucial piece of evidence along with the mounting circumstantial evidence. Brent Huck was taken into custody and accused of killing Misty Morse on October 23, 2002. Prosecutors claimed during the trial that Brent killed Misty because he was afraid her pregnancy would jeopardize his new relationship. They described in graphic detail how he used the pretense of reconciliation to entice Misty to her demise. The crucial DNA match from the dog hair discovered at the crime scene was among the strong circumstantial evidence gathered by detectives and presented by the prosecution. It was time to decide Brent's fate after all the arguments and supporting documentation had been presented. Brent Huck was found guilty of first-degree felony murder and felony kidnapping in May 2003. He received 2 consecutive life sentences without the chance of release. He is presently incarcerated at the Apalachicola Correctional Institution in Florida. This decision ensured that Misty's terrible death was not unanswered and gave her family a sense of justice and closure. This case emphasizes how crucial it is to persevere in pursuing justice despite obstacles. It also reminds us how important it is for communities and committed investigators to hold people responsible for their actions. Even though Misty's life was tragically cut short, her story would live on thanks to the pursuit of justice. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On a typical winter morning in 2006, a young woman disappeared without a trace in the busy city of Orlando, Florida, leaving a lingering sense of unease. The city, which is well known for its tourist attractions and lively neighborhoods, was quickly engulfed in terror as the disappearance of one woman turned into a mystery that would trouble many people for years to come. This is the tale of 24-year-old Jennifer Joyce Kessie, whose abrupt and inexplicable disappearance rocked her friends, family, and the community at large. Kessie had a bright future. Jennifer's fate is still unknown, despite a thorough investigation and a plethora of leads, including an enigmatic sighting of someone throwing a rolled-up carpet into a nearby lake months after she disappeared. Law enforcement is still perplexed by her case. Her story has been sustained over the years by her family's unrelenting search for answers, which has stoked optimism that the truth about her disappearance will eventually be revealed. On May 20, 1981, Jennifer Joyce Kessie was born in Orlando, Florida. Jennifer developed into a determined, perceptive, and compassionate young lady as she grew older. She did exceptionally well in her studies and extracurricular activities, and her family was very proud of her achievements. After graduating from Tampa's Vivian Gaither High School, Jennifer continued her education at the University of Central Florida, where she earned a degree in finance in 2003. She soon got a job at Central Florida Investments, an Ocoee timeshare company, as a finance manager. At the age of 24, Jennifer was establishing a prosperous life, living on her own, and looking forward to the future. In order to invest in her future and start a new chapter in her adult life, she had bought a condominium at the Mosaic at Millennia complex in Orlando. Jennifer was a cherished friend, sister, and daughter. She was renowned for having compassion and a cheerful disposition. She was very close to her family, especially her brother Logan and parents Drew and Joyce. Her abrupt disappearance in January 2006 left her family and friends bewildered and devastated, as they had always been there for her. Jennifer had a typical workday at Central Florida Investments on January 23, 2006. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, she left work, called her father, and then talked to her boyfriend. They talked about her recent trip, a brief getaway she had taken with him that had been a welcome diversion from her hectic life. The last verified conversation anyone had with Jennifer was during this call. Her boyfriend was worried when he did not receive his regular call on January 24, because she had a habit of calling him every morning. Her employer called her family when she failed to show up for work, and the morning passed without any communication from her. Since Jennifer was regarded as trustworthy and accountable, her family was aware that something was amiss. In the hopes that she would be there or that they would discover some clue as to her whereabouts, her parents drove to her condo. Jennifer's condo showed no signs of forced entry when they got there. It appeared from the scene inside that she had begun her morning as usual. Her towel was still wet, and her work clothes were neatly laid out, so there was proof that she had showered, dressed, and gotten ready for work. But she was nowhere to be found. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, and nothing seemed out of place. On January 26, 2006, 2 days after Jennifer Kesse disappeared, a big lead surfaced that gave some hope. Only a mile from her own condo, her black 2006 Chevy Malibu was found abandoned at the Huntington on the Green apartment complex. Although the car had been abandoned in a parking lot, no one was immediately interested in finding it. It was the video that the complex's security cameras had recorded. The video showed someone parking Jennifer's car, quietly exiting and leaving. But the video quality was so bad that it didn't provide many hints. Any identifying physical features were blurred, and the figure's face was hidden. Although it was evident that the person was male, the video offered no specific information regarding the person's height, physique, or attire. The suspect was later referred to by one journalist as the luckiest person of interest ever, considering the scant evidence provided by the video. Based on the hazy video, the FBI was called in to help identify the person's size and gender, but they were only able to estimate that the person was between 5 feet 3 and 5 inches tall. NASA attempted to extract clearer images from the video as well, but the suspect remained a dark figure with few distinguishing features. Investigators and Jennifer's family were disappointed when no conclusive identification could be made, despite their best efforts. In search of crucial hints, investigators focused on Jennifer's car, while the surveillance footage was still inconclusive. The vehicle's forensic analysis produced very little evidence. Despite the discovery of a small DNA fiber and a latent fingerprint, the case did not advance. The car had clearly been completely cleaned, indicating that whoever had left it had taken great care to remove all traces of themselves. The car was missing a number of things, including Jennifer's briefcase, purse, keys, iPod, and cell phone. The mystery was further complicated by the fact that her phone was still off and her bank account had not been accessed, in addition to these missing possessions. Authorities were unable to provide a definitive explanation for Jennifer's disappearance, which seemed to be more intentional. Jennifer Kesse's family and close friends were the first to be questioned, as is typical in cases involving missing persons. The goal of the investigation was to find out if Jennifer's family members had any reason to hurt her. Her ex-boyfriend, with whom she had broken up before dating Rob Allen, was among the first individuals questioned. Jason Schofield was his name, and he had recently stated that he wanted to resume their relationship, but it was soon determined that he was not responsible for her disappearance. Jennifer's then-boyfriend Rob Allen was also questioned. Rob, a British expat residing in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, had met Jennifer while visiting Orlando in 2005. Rob and Jennifer had been dating for a year when she vanished from sight. Rob and Jennifer made it a point to spend every weekend together, despite living roughly 3 hours apart. Jennifer's mother, Joyce, remembered that her daughter was in love and that the couple seemed to have a close relationship. Jennifer had taken a weekend trip to St. Croix with Rob a week prior to her disappearance. Rob said the trip was a unique experience. On January 23, 2006, Jennifer called her mother on her way to work after returning from St. Croix. After the trip, Jennifer was obviously happy, excited, and full of life. Joyce remembered how she sounded elated as she shared every detail about the trip and said she was on a cloud. She continued to communicate with her family as usual, speaking with her father and brother later that day. Around 10 o'clock that night, Jennifer made her last phone call to Rob Allen. Regretfully, the discussion did not conclude favorably. The strain of the long-distance relationship was starting to get to Rob, who confirmed that they had a disagreement during the call. Rob insisted that despite their sporadic difficulties, there was no sign that Jennifer had been angry or afraid about anything while they were speaking. He had no idea that he would never talk to Jennifer again after this call. Because it was not unusual for romantic partners to be involved in missing persons cases, investigators closely monitored Rob Allen while he was being questioned. But Rob's alibi was confirmed. There was no proof that he was involved in Jennifer's disappearance, and he had been in Fort Lauderdale when she vanished. The possibility that someone she knew might have been involved was nevertheless not ruled out by Jennifer's family, which included her parents, Joyce and Drew Kess. They remained watchful due to the emotional toll of the investigation and their fear of not knowing what had happened to their loved one. In particular, Jennifer's parents held out hope that someone would come forward with information that would help explain her disappearance. As investigators looked into every possibility, the investigation grew, but Jennifer's family remained committed to getting the truth. They never thought Rob Allen or any of Jennifer's family members had any motive to hurt her. Instead, as the investigation continued, they sensed that the mystery grew more complex. The investigation into Jennifer's disappearance evolved into a search for justice and the truth about what had happened to a lively young woman who appeared to have a promising future. Jennifer's condominium complex was going through major renovations when she vanished. The fact that many of the complex's employees did not speak English presented a problem for investigators. Jennifer had complained to her family that she was frequently whistled at, catcalled, and otherwise uneasy by the construction workers. Many of the employees were unable to be interviewed by law enforcement due to the language barrier, making them possible but evasive suspects. According to the surveillance footage, the person seen exiting Jennifer's car was dressed in white overalls, which are typically worn by manual laborers or painters. This made investigators question whether the person in the video was a construction worker on the property when she vanished. Nevertheless, the lead remained frustratingly ambiguous in the absence of additional evidence connecting the individual in the video to a particular employee. Jennifer's parents appeared in court in 2009 to request the case's release. Interviewing a former housekeeper who had worked at the complex gave detectives an unexpected lead. When the woman saw CCTV footage of the suspect, she surprised law enforcement by stating that the figure's gait, attire, and hairstyle reminded her of a man she knew from the complex named Chino, although she was unable to confirm that it was him. Her identification was a clue worth following up on. Chino had been employed at Jennifer's complex as a maintenance worker only a week prior to Jennifer's disappearance. He had even resided in a different complex building. It was quickly discovered by investigators that Chino was well known within the complex and that some residents remembered him mistreating women. Although investigators had no hard proof to connect Chino to the crime, a tip from the early stages of the investigation raised the possibility that he was involved in Jennifer's disappearance. When it was revealed that Chino was already serving time in a Florida prison for the statutory rape of a teenage girl, a crime he committed 2 years after Jennifer vanished, the case took yet another unexpected turn. Chino cooperated when asked about Jennifer's case and denied any involvement. He even consented to and passed a polygraph exam. Still, the lead cooled off once more. Jennifer's family became more and more irate with the Orlando Police Department's OPD handling of the case as the days stretched into weeks, and those weeks into months. Police refused to label her case as cold, which would have prevented the allocation of more resources, despite her persistent efforts. The family felt that law enforcement could have done more, but this decision left them feeling abandoned. When the family filed a lawsuit against the OPD in 2018 to gain complete access to Jennifer's case files, their frustration reached a breaking point. The Kesey family was granted access to more than 600 pages of documents and hours of audio and video recordings following a grueling legal battle. They hoped the documents would shed light on Jennifer's disappearance and offer fresh leads. Michael Torretta, a private investigator, was hired by the Kesey family to go through the case files and return to the crime scene. Interviewing former complex residents was Torretta's first step, and he was shocked by what he learned. Jennifer's neighbor Colleen recalled that the complex used to be a secure neighborhood. She and other women, however, started to feel uneasy when workers started residing in empty apartments throughout the complex. Nothing had been done despite their complaints about the workers' inappropriate behavior to the leasing manager. Several other women who had resided in the complex were also interviewed by Torretta, and they all voiced similar worries regarding the construction workers. Tammy, a neighbor, reported that she had observed odd occurrences in her apartment, including footprints discovered in her closet, her underwear drawer being thrown, and the shower appearing damp as though someone had used it. Tammy even caught a man on her patio who she thought was one of the employees looking at her. Once more, the name Chino came up. Another woman remembered how uncomfortable it was when Chino would frequently approach her in the parking lot late at night. Suspicion was heightened when Chino moved out of the complex in the middle of the night, 9 months after Jennifer vanished. Eventually, Torretta found Chino, who had served time for statutory rape and was now at liberty. He once more denied any involvement in Jennifer's disappearance, despite his cooperation and insistence on his innocence. According to Torretta's main theory, one or more employees who had been residing in the apartment complex targeted Jennifer. Torretta said the workers, many of whom had been crammed into a single apartment, probably moved in after Jennifer locked her door early on January 23rd. They are thought to have pulled her into one of the empty apartments in the area. Unfortunately, since many of the workers were undocumented and had no long-term connections to the complex, there is no record of their identities. 10 months after Jennifer's disappearance, a person was observed throwing a rolled-up piece of carpet into a lake near her condo, according to additional investigation. Because workers had been installing carpet in the building across from Jennifer on the day of her disappearance, this discovery seemed especially intriguing. In 2019, a dive team searched the lake, but they were never able to find any carpet. In order to preserve Jennifer's memory in the public consciousness and media, Drew, Joyce, and Logan persisted in following up on every possible lead. To raise funds for the costs of a private investigation, they set up a GoFundMe page and urged anyone with information to contact a special tip line. CrimeCon appearances, social media appeals, and public awareness campaigns all helped to keep the case in the public eye, but none of them yielded the answers they so desperately needed. Jennifer's family persisted in seeking justice in spite of the obstacles. After years of advocacy, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, took over Jennifer's case in 2022. This change was welcomed by the Kesey family, who thought that FDLE's resources and experience might finally provide the answers they were looking for. Joyce Kesey and Drew were cautiously optimistic, pointing out that the investigation entered a new phase with FDLE's involvement. There was hope that the case might make progress thanks to the agency's sophisticated forensic tools and investigative resources. The same period saw the publication of a book by Jennifer's uncle, Bill Gilmore, which described the family's search for her. He told tales about Jennifer's life and the unsolved mysteries surrounding her disappearance through public speaking engagements and appearances at events such as CrimeCon. His efforts strengthened Jennifer's case and brought attention to the family's dissatisfaction with the OPD's initial handling of leads and evidence. Jennifer Kesey's disappearance has had a profound impact on her family, particularly on her brother Logan and parents Drew and Joyce. The lack of answers has caused them to suffer emotionally for almost 20 years. There is a sense of lost time every year that goes unresolved, such as holidays and birthdays they never spent with Jennifer. They hope for closure in spite of the heartache. Their extended family and close friends also feel the pain, and they keep helping with the search and spreading the word. Despite the uncertainty, the family is steadfast in their conviction that the mystery will be unraveled. The youngest, Logan, shares his parents' desire for justice after seeing their suffering. The Keseys are steadfast in their pursuit of the truth and in preserving Jennifer's memory. No matter how long it takes, they are adamant about finding answers and won't give up until justice is done. Their strength is demonstrated by their tenacity in continuing to search for almost 20 years. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Have you ever questioned how well you actually know the neighbors? What's behind their warm grins and informal salutations? Psychologists and investigators concur that people with psychopathic tendencies are more likely to commit violent crimes, but there are no clear rules for spotting potentially dangerous people among your acquaintances. The beginning of this eerie case involves Brian and Beverly Mauck, an apparently ideal couple whose lives appeared to be straight out of a fairy tale. They enjoyed traveling and spending time together, were financially stable, and were incredibly in love. However, when they relocated to a different neighborhood, everything was different. Beverly and Brian were found dead in their house shortly after they had moved in. Investigators were immediately directed to a nearby residence by blood evidence found at the scene. Even the most experienced detectives were taken aback by the motivation behind this heinous act. Brian and Beverly Mauck's love story. At a party hosted by a mutual friend in the spring of 2001, Brian and Beverly first crossed paths. They were both college students at the time, but it was obvious they had discovered something unique as soon as their eyes met. They were inseparable after their initial mutual admiration swiftly developed into a strong bond. The couple visited each other's families in turn that summer, introducing their partners to their parents and being forthright about their sincere intentions. The relationship was immediately approved by both families, who noted how well the two complemented one another. From an early age, Beverly and Brian had been active and daring. They were never satisfied to remain motionless for long and thrived on sports, thrills, and novel experiences. Beverly was a gifted athlete who loved learning new languages, played guitar effortlessly, and was an excellent baseball and track star. She was loved by both her peers and her friends, and her bright smile could light up any space. Sports that were riskier and more unusual had always appealed to Brian. He was passionate about rock climbing, surfing, and diving, and he loved taking risks. A true adventurer at heart, he saw danger not as a threat, but as a challenge he was always ready to face. Every year, he tried to visit a new place and learn a new skill. When Brian and Beverly first saw and spoke to each other, they immediately realized they were on the same wavelength. This became the starting point for their intense and fulfilling relationship. Together, they climbed mountains, skied and snowboarded, went scuba diving, and conquered waves and peaks alike. Despite their whirlwind romance and seemingly perfect relationship, the couple wasn't in a rush to get married. They both wanted to finish their education first. Once they graduated, they focused on saving for a house. Brian began building a career at an industrial company, and Beverly got a job as a hotel administrator, where her language skills were invaluable. On May 15, 2006, the couple officially tied the knot. They held a beautiful ceremony by the ocean, inviting only their closest family and friends. Afterward, they went on a long honeymoon, visiting several countries. When they returned, Brian and Beverly purchased a spacious home in the quiet town of Graham in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. The house was located in a scenic and sparsely populated area near a forest and a river. It was a perfect place to start their family and enjoy a peaceful life. Brian worked as an engineer at a branch of a large industrial company, while Beverly focused on translation work and decided to pursue a second degree. The couple quickly got to know their neighbors and made friends in their new town. Unfortunately, their happy and carefree life didn't last long. A startling incident in a quiet neighborhood. Around 8 a.m. on Saturday, November 17, 2007, Brian's friend Steven showed up at the couple's home. That morning, the two were going fishing. When Steven knocked on the door, no one answered. Steven knocked more loudly and waited, thinking that Brian had likely overslept, but there was no sound in the house. Steven made the decision to wait in his car for roughly half an hour while making several unsuccessful attempts to call Brian, but his calls were not answered. Frustrated and feeling a bit upset that his friend might have changed plans without telling him, Steven eventually left to fish on his own, since he had all the necessary gear with him. Later that day, still unable to reach Brian or Beverly, Steven decided to return to their house once again. There was no answer at the door. This time, Steven decided to walk around the property and look through the windows. He he was starting to feel uneasy. Brian was a responsible and punctual person who wouldn't just disappear without notifying anyone. When Stephen reached the garage, he looked through a small window and saw that the couple's car was parked inside. This made him even more anxious, but he tried to push away any bad thoughts. Moving to the living room window, he attempted to see inside, but as it was already getting dark outside and the house lights were off, it was hard to make anything out. What he could see, however, left him deeply alarmed. The TV was lying face down on the floor, and just beyond it, something large and unmoving was on the ground. Stephen rushed back to his car to grab his fishing flashlight, switched it on, and directed the beam into the living room. What he saw froze him in terror. On the floor lay two bodies, partially covered with a blanket that was soaked through with blood. One bare foot stuck out from one side, and a hand was visible on the other. Horrified, Stephen immediately called emergency services to report what he had seen. He waited for law enforcement to arrive, staying by the house of his friends. When officers arrived, Stephen was the first to be interviewed. He recounted everything he knew about the day and expressed deep regret that he hadn't checked the windows earlier that morning when neither Brian nor Beverly answered his knocks or calls. Examining the crime scene, the front door wasn't locked, nor was it forced open, which immediately raised suspicions. Inside, in the living room, the lifeless bodies of the homeowners were discovered. Both had been dead for at least 12 hours. Based on initial observations, the cause of death was determined to be gunshot wounds inflicted by a large caliber weapon. Each victim had been shot 3 times, leaving no chance of survival. The precision of the attack indicated that the assailant was determined and deliberate. But why? There were no signs of theft, personal belongings, cell phones, and even cash were untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. There were no signs of struggle, and apart from the gunshot wounds, the bodies showed no evidence of other injuries or aggression. Investigators were left with the chilling impression that this was either a calculated execution or a deeply personal act of vengeance. However, according to witnesses, the couple had no known enemies or unresolved conflicts. The bodies had been moved after the crime, as evidenced by drag marks smeared with blood across the floor. The perpetrator had clumsily attempted to clean up, leaving smeared blood trails and splatters on the walls and furniture, indicating where the victims had been during the attack. 6 spent shell casings were found at the scene. Surprisingly, the assailant hadn't bothered to collect them. Later, forensics verified that a .22 caliber revolver was used to fire the shots. Investigators came to the conclusion that a single perpetrator most likely shot both victims using the same weapon. The lock remained intact, indicating that the couple had voluntarily allowed the guest inside. Investigators speculated that Brian may have answered the door, identified the guest, and granted them entry. He may have turned toward the living room after inviting the individual inside, but the moment he did, the attacker produced a gun and fired 3 close-range shots into Brian's back. One of the bullets left his body and hit the TV screen, knocking it to the ground. Beverly probably came out of the bedroom because of the noise. She attempted to flee when she noticed her husband lying in a pool of blood and the attacker standing close by. Unfortunately, she didn't get very far before she was killed in the hallway after being hit in the back by 3 bullets. Later, her body was pulled into the living room and set next to Brian's. The fact that both victims were still in their pajamas suggests that the crime was committed while they were asleep in the early hours of the morning. It was still unclear why the attacker had wrapped a blanket over the bodies. The drag marks on the floor were smeared, giving the impression that someone had attempted to clean them but had instead made the situation more chaotic. It appeared as if someone had attempted to sweep away a sizable bloodstain that was close to the body. Investigators discovered a long-handled plastic broom behind the couch, its bristles matted with dried blood. But the reason the broom handle was left at the scene was because the criminal had carefully cleaned it of fingerprints. The reason for the broom's use quickly became apparent. The criminal had been carefully cleaning the floor in an attempt to remove bloody shoe prints. Similarly, palm prints and smudged fingerprints were discovered on door handles, furniture, and walls, making identification impossible. Experienced forensic investigators were aware that the longer a criminal remained at the scene, the more likely it was that they would leave behind something incriminating, even if the attacker made an effort to clean up and hide their tracks. Their intuition was right. They discovered a crucial clue: a partial boot print on the blanket that covered the victims' bodies. Because it wasn't blood-stained, the print wasn't immediately noticeable. Rather, the tread pattern showed on the fabric underneath it, and it was imprinted where there was only a thin layer of blood on the floor. After sending the blanket to a lab, forensic experts determined that the tread belonged to a rare type of heavy-duty work boots with a unique sole design. After more research, it was discovered that a Clearfield County construction company had recently bought multiple pairs of these exact boots. With this lead, investigators started questioning company employees in an effort to reduce the number of possible suspects on their list. Detectives discovered a palm print on one of the surfaces of the house in addition to the shoe print. There was optimism that the case would be resolved in a matter of days, and it appeared to be a breakthrough. Nevertheless, no matches were found when the print was scanned through law enforcement databases. This implied that the offender had no past records and had never had their fingerprints taken by the police. The initial suspect, Stephen, the friend who had found the bodies and alerted the police to the crime, was, of course, the first suspect. Suspicion was aroused by the fact that he had been to the crime scene twice that day, but Stephen clarified that he didn't call the police until later because he had thought earlier in the morning that Brian and Beverly were just sleeping. Stephen was shocked and furious to learn that he was a suspect. He had no alibi because he said he had been fishing by the river by himself for almost the whole day, where no one else had seen him. Nevertheless, his timeline was confirmed by investigators using traffic camera footage. As he had described, the recordings verified that he had traveled to and from the fishing site during the day. Stephen was further exonerated by fingerprint analysis, as tests for gunshot residue on his skin and clothing revealed no evidence, and his prints did not match any recovered from the scene. Furthermore, the boot prints were not the same size as Stephen's shoes, and he had no affiliation with the construction company that had bought the boots. All suspicions against him were abandoned, since there was no proof linking him to the crime. An unexpected observer. In the meantime, detectives interviewed neighbors extensively in an attempt to locate witnesses. They eventually received a promising lead when they knocked on the door of Daniel and Jennifer Tabaris, who lived across the street from the Mocks. When they called, Daniel said he was happy to answer their questions, but that his wife Jennifer was at work. He disclosed that at approximately 5:30 a.m., he now knows that the strange noises he heard from the Mocks' house on the day of the crime were gunshots. Daniel, intrigued but wary, had noticed a white pickup truck parked close to the Mocks' home through his window. He was positive the car was not the couple's. Two men left the Mocks' home a few minutes after the loud noises were heard. The low light just before dawn made it difficult for Daniel Tavares, the witness, to get a clear view of them, but he gave a thorough account of the white pickup truck's driver that was parked close to the house. Daniel reported that the driver was a white man of about 40 years of age, with a sturdy build, long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and a mustache. Additionally, he saw a tattoo on the man's left hand, though he was unable to discern the design. No other neighbors reported seeing anything similar, despite the fact that this information seemed promising. Brian and Beverly's friends, family, and co-workers were unable to name anyone in their social circle who fit this description or had a truck like that. The fact that the car was not visible on any local traffic cameras further suggests that the criminals may have evaded detection by taking a detour through the woods. A county-wide alert was issued for the white pickup truck, but no leads were found. A fresh suspect surfaces. In an interview with detectives, Beverly's mother recalled that a few months prior to the crime, her daughter had brought up Jeremy Flint, a neighbor. Law enforcement had been keeping an eye on Jeremy, a 22-year-old man, for dealing illegal substances. Other neighbors had made disparaging remarks about him, and his home was notorious for being visited by suspicious people on a regular basis. Because of this, investigators began to think about him as a possible suspect in the heinous double crime. Jeremy wasn't home when the police came to visit him. At first, they believed he might have run away after committing the crime. After interviewing more neighbors, it was discovered that Brian and Beverly had thrown a small party at their house just before the tragedy. Jeremy had unexpectedly arrived, uninvited and under the influence of drugs. His actions were characterized as aggressive by witnesses. He incited arguments, insulted visitors, and harassed a few of the women. He eventually had to leave, but not before promising that the couple would come to regret what they had done. A cell phone and a gun with ammunition that had been kept in a pantry drawer were among the things that Brian and Beverly discovered missing from their house the following day. The couple chose to confront Jeremy because they were positive he was to blame. They visited his home and firmly but politely demanded the return of their belongings, threatening to call the police if they weren't given back. It might have been a risky error to make this rash threat against someone connected to illegal activity. Jeremy refused to return the items and denied stealing anything, but inexplicably the missing items turned up in the couple's backyard the next day. Beverly and Brian were certain that Jeremy had left them there overnight. Even though the incident seemed to be over, Beverly was still uncomfortable. She started urging her husband to think about relocating to a different neighborhood because she was afraid of being home alone. The alibi of Jeremy. When Jeremy eventually made it back to town, he was taken into custody by police to be questioned. He returned the day after the crime, but it soon became apparent that he had been out of town for almost a week. He had spent 6 days with his parents after traveling to another state to see them. He had been out drinking with friends the night of the crime, according to surveillance footage from a bar, and his alibi was supported by multiple witnesses. Furthermore, forensic analysis verified that Jeremy's palm prints and fingerprints did not correspond with those discovered at the scene. Jeremy was ruled out as a suspect because there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Recent advances in the case. The only witness in the case, Daniel Tavares, was contacted again in the hopes that he might remember something new after investigators had exhausted all other suspects and leads. Daniel's story abruptly changed during this follow-up visit. In addition to describing one of the men leaving the house with a scar on his cheek, he claimed to recall specifics about the clothing the criminals were wearing. Daniel had previously mentioned that the men's faces were hidden by hoodies, so this was a startling change. Daniel was asked to identify the window he had been looking through at the time of the incident by a detective. Despite the fact that it was daylight, the detective's analysis of the view revealed that it was still challenging to discern the specifics of a person across the street. It seemed unlikely that Daniel could have seen so much, given that the events had occurred in the early morning twilight. This disparity raised the possibility that Daniel had been lying all along. However, why? Was he personally responsible for the crime? Daniel produced a number of pairs of dress shoes, boots, and sneakers when investigators asked to see his footwear, but none of them matched the footprint discovered at the scene. Detectives began to examine Daniel more closely, however, as his story changed and his actions became more suspicious. A difficult history. The background of Daniel Tavares proved to be extremely disturbing. His life took a bad turn early on. He was born in 1966 as the youngest child in a military family. Daniel's mother took care of him and his 3 older sisters after his parents divorced when he was only 4 years old. Shortly after, his father got married again and showed little concern for his former spouse's kids. Daniel had left school by the 9th grade, started stealing, running away from home, and experimenting with illegal drugs. He was first arrested for robbery when he was 18, but then his estranged father stepped in and helped him get probation instead of going to jail. The father appeared to want to give Daniel another chance, possibly out of guilt. Even so, Daniel kept getting into trouble with the law over the years. He was always given light sentences for his offenses. Daniel's father tried to provide for him after he relocated to Florida in the late 1980s. In addition to trying to help Daniel find stable work, his father funded an expensive treatment program at a private rehabilitation clinic. However, Daniel was caught stealing and dealing drugs once more within 6 months. He was sent back to live with his mother after his father gave up this time. Daniel's dependencies had started to negatively impact his mental health by this time. He received a schizophrenia diagnosis and medication within a year, but Daniel hardly ever took his drugs as prescribed. Rather, he combined them with alcohol, which resulted in violent and hazardous outbursts. A case of violence. During a fight with his mother in July 1991, Daniel snatched up a knife and attacked her, wounding her almost 30 times. At the scene, she passed away. Daniel stated during his trial that he was influenced by voices in his head that told him to kill her. Psychiatrists appointed by the court, however, concluded that Daniel was legally liable because he had been aware of his actions. He received a 20-year prison sentence. Daniel served less time than the entire sentence and was released on parole in 2006. Daniel Tavares started communicating with Jennifer Freitas while incarcerated, and the two eventually fell in love. Jennifer awaited his release, and they were married as soon as he was granted parole. Around the same time as the Mauk couple, Daniel moved into her house in Graham, a small town. Daniel broke the conditions of his parole by moving to a different state. He ought to have been taken into custody right away, but a technical glitch and police carelessness kept that from happening. Even after detectives discovered a bloody handprint at the Mauk's crime scene, Daniel managed to avoid detection because his fingerprints were inadvertently deleted from the criminal database. It was as if everything was somehow conspiring in his favor. Daniel briefly worked for a construction company that bought the rare work boots connected to the crime, according to additional investigation, but there was not enough hard evidence for detectives to make an arrest. They had to carefully construct their case so as not to alert Daniel or Jennifer, his possible accomplice. Placing the trap. Daniel was asked to come to the police station on November 24, 2007, ostensibly to help with composite sketches of possible suspects. He enthusiastically accepted and enthusiastically described and assisted in drawing portraits of people he had made up entirely for about an hour. He was preoccupied when a second officer walked in and remarked nonchalantly that in order to rule Daniel out as a suspect, they needed to get his fingerprint. After some hesitation, Daniel finally consented, certain that there would be no evidence of his presence at the crime scene. The officer casually mentioned that investigators had discovered an unidentified bloody handprint at the Mauk's residence after fingerprinting. Daniel tensed visibly and started to explain that his prints might have been left at the Mauk's house because he had been friendly with them and frequently visited them. The officer calmly replied that there was no reason to be concerned because the handprint was bloody and obviously that of the criminal. The discussion then turned to Daniel's past by a second detective. Daniel confessed to killing his mother after he brought up the crime for which he had served time. Unexpectedly, Daniel started to describe the horrifying specifics of that crime with icy fervor. He gave off the air of a real psychopath, grinning as he explained what he had done. Forensic experts were comparing Daniel's prints to those recovered from the crime scene in the meantime. Detectives presented Daniel with the evidence after the results showed a perfect match. Anger immediately replaced his arrogant manner. However, officers handcuffed him and placed him under arrest before he could lash out. Daniel was forced to confess and assist investigators due to the overwhelming evidence against him. He clarified that he had spent hours drinking and using potent drugs at a bar the night before the crime. The bar staff threw him out and threatened to call the police when he ran out of money to pay his tab. Daniel Tavares was furious when he remembered that he had given his neighbor Brian Mauk a tattoo as a friendly gesture the month before. Daniel, however, arbitrarily demanded $50 for the service after deciding that he should be paid for his labor. At 5 in the morning, armed with his revolver, he arrived at the Mauk's home while they were still sleeping together when Brian opened the door. Irritated by the early visit, Daniel's demand for money was there. Perplexed and irritated, Brian declined, instructing Daniel to return once he had calmed down. However, Daniel insisted. Brian decided it would be simpler to pay in order to defuse the situation, so he went to another room to get the money. Daniel took offense at a comment he made as he was leaving. Daniel became indignant at this. In an instant, he pulled out his gun and shot Brian 3 times in the back. Beverly was awakened by gunfire and went outside to investigate. She saw Daniel standing with a gun over her husband, who was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. She attempted to flee back to the bedroom after realizing the danger, but she was shot 3 times in the back before she could do so. Upon acknowledging the seriousness of his actions, Daniel returned home and asked his wife Jennifer to assist in cleaning up the crime scene. Sadly, Jennifer didn't appear shocked by what he did. Together, they carried Beverly's body into the living room, set it next to Brian, and wrapped a blanket around them both. Jennifer proposed erasing the bloody footprints with a broom. Additionally, she carefully cleaned surfaces to get rid of fingerprints, but she overlooked one important one. After cleaning was completed, Daniel threw the murder weapon into a nearby river. The revolver was never found, despite investigators' best efforts. The fallout. Daniel Tavares received a life sentence without the chance of release. Jennifer, his wife, expressed profound regret, saying she had aided Daniel because she was afraid for her own safety. She only received a 1-year prison sentence for tampering with the evidence. A terrible discovery was made in 2015 by new homeowners remodeling the house where Daniel had previously resided with his mother. They discovered human remains when they were digging in the backyard. The remains were identified by forensic analysis as belonging to a young neighbor who vanished in 1990. Investigators found that Daniel had been attracted to the woman romantically, but had reacted violently and fatally when she turned him down. Her body was interred in his mother's backyard, where it was kept secret for many years. Daniel was given a second life sentence for this offense. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Carol Ann Barrett's murder was a terrifying mystery for 44 years. The 18-year-old high school student went missing on March 23, 1980, while she was spending spring break with her friends in her hotel room in Daytona Beach, Florida. Later, her body was discovered left on a highway. Carol's family and friends were left without answers when the case went cold, despite the fact that a sketch of the suspect was made based on witness descriptions. However, in a startling turn of events, a serial killer who had been convicted came forward and confessed. What made this predator come clean after all these years? And who was he? Could Carol's loved ones finally find closure as a result of this confession? When 18-year-old Carol Ann Barrett jumped in to save her 3-year-old niece Claire Gilligan from drowning during a family pool party in Zanesville, Ohio, in March 1980, she demonstrated courage and quick thinking. In a 2019 interview, Claire recollected this event and explained how Carol had saved her life by performing CPR on her for 10 minutes. "My aunt was a hero," she remarked, highlighting their close relationship. Carol tragically lost her life under horrific circumstances just 1 week after saving her niece, and her murder remained unsolved for more than 40 years. Carol, a senior in high school from Ohio, had spent spring break in Daytona Beach, Florida, with 7 of her friends. 2 a.m., a stranger broke into the girls' hotel room on Sunday, March 23rd. With a gun in hand, he ordered the group to strip and threatened to murder one if they resisted. He chose to hold one of them hostage in order to guarantee his escape free from police intervention. The intruder initially targeted Carol's friend Pam, but he was provoked by her panic. Carol showed incredible bravery by offering to go instead. Before removing Carol, the attacker locked her friends on the balcony. Soon, the police were called. A police sketch of the suspect was made after speaking with Carol's friends, who had all gone through the ordeal and seen the kidnapping. Unfortunately for Carol, it was too late. Carol's body was found dead in a ditch beside I-95 in Jacksonville, Florida, on Monday, March 24, 1980. The back of her head had been shot execution style. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office was unable to identify the murderer despite the kidnapper's sketches. Although the case was still pending, Carol's family was deeply affected emotionally by the crime's brutality. Carol was a happy, intelligent adolescent who enjoyed collecting watches before her life was suddenly taken from her. In a 2019 interview, her niece Claire Gilligan stated, "I've held on to one of her watches like it's $1 million. I know it sounds weird, but I'd just like to have her things to remember her by." Carol's family was subjected to cruel prank calls following her death, with anonymous callers threatening, "You're next." This harassment added to their grief and made Claire more aware of the dangers in the world, which led her to pursue a degree in criminal justice. However, Carol's family was still plagued by the decades-long lack of answers. The unresolved murder of her aunt left Claire with a permanent wound. "I get so mad when I watch crime shows and they find the criminal. Those families have closure and I never will," Claire said. The mystery remained, despite attempts to rekindle interest in Carol's case, such as 2 stories broadcast by Action Newsjacks in 2017 and 2018, and the distribution of both computer-generated and hand-drawn sketches of the suspect. But the family remained hopeful that justice would eventually be done. Investigators and family members trying to solve the mystery of Carol's death had several important questions. What exactly happened before the break-in at the Daytona Beach hotel room? Were there any witnesses who might have seen the suspect before or after the incident, outside the group of friends? Was there any connection, even a shaky one, between Carol and the criminal? Would they be able to identify the murderer through sophisticated forensic investigation? Had there been any comparable incidents nearby that could point to a trend or offer clues as to the identity of the suspect? Could Carol's killer or someone with knowledge of the crime be connected to the spoof phone calls made to her family? Even as the investigation went on, the questions kept coming. Decades passed, but the murderer in the police sketch was never apprehended. Carol's murder was eventually deemed a cold case. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, JSO, obtained a confession from a convicted serial killer about the murder of 18-year-old Carol Ann Barrett in a startling turn of events that offered some closure to the long-running cold case. When the JSO Cold Case Unit made the decision to review the evidence, the case was brought back to life in August 2017. After a thorough examination, they ultimately determined that Billy Mansfield Jr. was a person of interest in 2022. In September 2022, Mansfield, already serving a prison sentence for a string of murders, acknowledged after several interviews that he was the person pictured in the police sketch. He admitted to taking Carol from her Florida hotel room in March 1980 and killing her soon after. Convicted serial killer Billy Mansfield Jr. had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. However, who was he, and how did he spend over 40 years avoiding justice for Carol's murder? The oldest of 5 children, William Mansfield Jr. was born in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in 1956. His home life was far from perfect, even though he was said to have had a good upbringing. William Sr., his father, was a convicted child molester who fostered his son's erratic conduct. Mansfield's decision to forge his birth certificate and leave school at the age of 14 in order to enlist in the Army was probably influenced by this dysfunction. Mansfield's problems only got worse while serving in the military. He started experimenting with drugs and became severely addicted to alcohol, which led to treatment at a Tampa Veterans Administration hospital. He married Phyllis Spilemaker in 1975 in an attempt to lead a normal life, but by 1979, things had fallen apart. Phyllis decided to raise their 2 children alone in Michigan. In her unsettling portrayal of Mansfield following their divorce, Phyllis claimed that he was a closeted bisexual who brought men home from gay bars and had sex with them in front of her. Mansfield's terrible deeds were made possible by his traumatic upbringing and destructive decisions. He followed a startling and repulsive path influenced by his past, abusing and killing women and girls. Mansfield was accused of sexual misconduct by a babysitter in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in January 1977. He received a sentence of 36 months of probation and 6 months in jail. However, he violated his parole and was sent back to prison shortly after his release for assaulting 2 teenagers in a rural part of the city. Mansfield was housed in the same cell as fellow prisoner Albert Lee III, who admitted to Mansfield that he had kidnapped and murdered 11-year-old Linda Vanderveen from a Grand Rapids school crossing. Later, after serving a year, Mansfield would use this information to testify against Lee in exchange for a reduced sentence, which led to his release. However, these prison terms had little effect on his desire for violence. Mansfield forced 18-year-old Pamela Sherrill into his van and abducted her on June 19, 1980. After driving her to a rented trailer, he attacked and hurt her. Mansfield was evading capture when Sherrill called the police to report the assault. Mansfield was arrested in Santa Cruz, California on November 23, but was later freed after posting bail. Mansfield was then released once more to hunt down his next victim. The body of 29-year-old Renee Saling was found dead in a drainage ditch beside Buena Vista Road in Watsonville, California, on December 7, 1980. The previous day was the last time her husband had seen Renee, a mother of 3. Her clothing was ripped when she was discovered, and there were obvious signs of assault. Her blouse and pants had been pulled down to her ankles. She had been strangled, according to the coroner's report. Police created descriptions of 2 suspects based on witness statements, young men in their 20s who were probably related to one another. 4 days later, a rookie police officer in Winnemucca, Nevada, brought Mansfield and his brother Gary, age 23, in for interrogation. Despite lying about their identities and ages, They fit the suspect profiles in terms of their physical characteristics. The brothers were arrested at California's Humboldt County Jail. The Mansfield brothers were charged with murder in connection with the death of Renee Saling and were arraigned in a Watsonville court on December 16. They were known as the Bag Brothers by the media because they covered their heads with paper bags to shield possible witnesses' statements. On February 4, 1981, Justice John Marlowe ordered the Mansfields to stand trial for Renee's murder, despite their not guilty plea. The Hernando County Sheriff's Department in Florida secured a search warrant in mid-March 1981 in order to excavate the Mansfield family's Spring Hill, Florida property. After an informant claimed that a body had been buried on the property, this action was taken. After a protracted search and excavation, authorities finally discovered a real house of horrors. The first set of skeletal remains, which included a skull, was discovered in a shallow grave that was blanketed. These remains were sent for analysis right away. Dr. William Whitman, a pathologist, identified the bones as those of a female under 20 who had passed away approximately 5 years prior. Persuaded that the site contained more remains, metal detection specialists and other officers from nearby counties were called in to assist. Continued excavations over the next few weeks produced more upsetting findings. On March 24th, investigators found a small sack of human bones beneath the fireplace, after initially finding the bones of cows and chickens. Inspired by this discovery, researchers dug deeper and discovered more skeletons, all of them young women. 4 victims' remains were discovered interred on the Mansfield property in Florida. Elaine Louise Ziegler, a 15-year-old adolescent girl who vanished on New Year's Eve of 1975, was identified as the first body discovered at the property based on the skull, skeletal features, and a missing tooth. Elaine was on vacation with her mother and stepfather when she vanished from a KOA campground near Brooksville, Florida. Elaine is originally from Parkman. Elaine's parents filed a missing persons report after she was last seen leaving for the camp showers and did not return the following day. Initially thinking Elaine was a fugitive, the local police department and volunteers set up search parties to comb the area. Some said they saw a girl who fit her description riding a motorcycle, and when questioned, she said she was going back to Others claimed to have witnessed a girl who fit her description talking to a man in his 20s close to the shower area before he got into his car, which was a light blue Ford with Florida license plates. Among the remains was a young girl's skull, which Dr. Michael Charney, a now retired professor of anthropology, sent to Colorado State University for reconstruction. Jane Doe, the victim's tentative name, was believed to be under 13 years old. Sadly, no conclusive matches were ever found, and her identity is still a mystery. It wasn't until July 2022 that the third body, a white woman between the ages of 22 and 30, was identified, thanks to a breakthrough in genetic genealogy. On May 16, 1980, Teresa Finningham, then 16 years old, was reported missing after she did not appear for a scheduled job interview in Tampa, Florida. Teresa, a Hillsborough Community College employee and native of Tampa, was last seen on April 27, 1980, in the Pam's Liquor Lounge parking lot with a man who was described as a biker. She had left her glasses and car keys at the bar. Forensic dentistry was later used to identify her decomposing body. The Mansfield family home in Spring Hill was searched again almost 40 years after the original excavation. In October 2020, Mansfield's brother Gary was arrested on drug charges, which led to the second search. More human remains were found to have been traced, presenting a somber image of a serial killer whose crimes had been ignored for years. The families of the victims have found some closure as a result of the excavation and identification efforts, but there are still many unanswered questions regarding the full scope of the Mansfield brothers' crimes. In order to avoid local publicity bias, Mansfield's trial for the murder of Renee Saling in California was rescheduled to the city of San Rafael after the skeletons were discovered in 1981. His prior criminal activity and serial killing spree garnered media attention during the trial. A mistrial resulted from the jury's inability to reach a unanimous verdict in spite of the evidence presented. Chip Harp, the assistant state attorney, asked for and received a 6-month delay. On February 8, 1982, the new trial was scheduled to begin. Mansfield was charged with the murder of the young women discovered buried on his family's property at this time by a Florida Hernando County court. At the time of this indictment, Mansfield was being detained at the Santa Cruz County Jail in California. Mansfield's brother Gary and a woman named Cindy consented to testify against him at the retrial. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Initially claiming innocence, Mansfield entered a guilty plea to all 4 murders as part of a plea deal at the Hernando County trial for the Florida killings, earning him 4 life sentences. He acknowledged, "I'm pleading guilty because I am guilty of the charges and have no other reason," in a prepared statement. Despite early setbacks, Mansfield was ultimately found guilty and given several life sentences, which guaranteed his incarceration and prevented additional harm. His brothers and other witnesses' participation was essential in obtaining these convictions, underscoring the significance of thorough legal and investigative procedures when handling repeat offenders. The horrific findings on Mansfield's property, in particular, served as a sobering reminder of the extent of his violent tendencies and the difficulties law enforcement had in apprehending him. New developments in forensic investigation have led to the recent discovery of yet another of Mansfield's victims after decades of incarceration. Following several interviews, Billy Mansfield Jr. admitted in September 2022 to kidnapping 18-year-old Carol Ann Barrett from her hotel room in Daytona Beach and killing her soon after. Her body was discovered in a ditch 44 years prior to this admission. How many more unidentified victims could Mansfield be connected to? It is hoped that by cooperating, police will be able to solve other unsolved cases. Mansfield, now 68, is already serving 4 concurrent life sentences in Florida for different murder cases, in addition to a life sentence for murder in California. The state attorney's office in the 4th Judicial Circuit chose not to press further charges against him because he was already in jail when he confessed to killing Carol Ann Barrett. After more than 40 years of uncertainty and sorrow, Mansfield's confession offers the Barrett family some measure of closure. The case's reopening and the confession that followed demonstrate how law enforcement will continue to pursue justice, even as memories fade and time goes on. Because of the investigators' unwavering efforts to solve her murder, Carol Ann Barrett's story, which was marked by both her tragic end and her heroic final act, now has a conclusion. The events of that fateful night still leave us wondering what really happened as we reach the end of this incredible tale. What do you think of Carol's courage in offering to accompany Mansfield instead of her friend? Do you think there are more bodies buried elsewhere in Mansfield? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. 2 roommates, Lori Lister, age 21, and Melinda Aguilar, age 18, were the victims of a horrific attack in their Houston, Texas apartment on Sunday, May 23, 1982. They appeared to be the target of a man who was obviously trying to kill them. He restrained them and tried to drown Lori in the bathtub of their apartment. Melinda managed to get away though by feigning fainting and then plunging headfirst from her balcony. She asked for assistance and she and her roommate were saved with the help of a neighbor. As he tried to escape, the offender, Coral Watts, 28, was taken into custody. Nobody could have predicted that he was suspected of killing nearly 100 other women in addition to being involved in these 2 attempted murders. In 1982, he admitted to the murders of 13 women and was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Then, in a startling turn of events in the early 2000s, this man, who had committed multiple murders, was about to be released from prison. He was reclassified as a nonviolent felon as a result of a contentious court decision. Remarkably, well-behaved nonviolent felons could have 3 days taken off their sentence for every day they served under Texas law. Model inmate Watts had accrued enough time deductions to be eligible for release on May 9, 2006. The public, police, and relatives of the victims were all in complete shock and terror. Everyone was plagued by the unanswered question, why? How could a murderer like him be freed against all logic? What possible reason could there be for releasing a serial killer who has killed numerous people? Richard Eugene Watts and Dorothy Mae Young were the parents of Carl Eugene Watts, also known as Coral, who was born in Killeen, Texas, on November 7, 1953. His mother was a kindergarten art teacher, and his father was a private first class in the Army. Watts was raised by his mother after his parents divorced before he turned 2. After they moved to Inkster, Michigan, Dorothy May married Norman Caesar, a mechanic, in 1962. The two of them had 2 daughters. Watts and his sister fought meningitis when Watts was 8 years old. He was held back in school for an additional year and missed the 3rd grade because of the illness, which almost took his life. Watts was temporarily housed at Herman Kiefer Hospital, where he required isolation from other patients and spinal taps. Journalists reported that Watts' body temperature rose to dangerously high levels, which raised questions about possible brain damage. His family observed a change in his personality after his illness. His memory deteriorated, his attention span was shortened, and he became shy, quiet, and introverted. Having been held back a grade and experiencing chronic insomnia, Watts struggled to keep up academically. His sleep cycle was disturbed by violent dreams in which he battled and killed the evil spirits of women. At the age of 12, Watts started to enjoy his sleep-induced fantasies of torturing and killing girls and young women. When asked later about his crimes and the reason he killed his victims, Watts explained that he wanted to free their spirits because they had evil eyes. Watts began stalking girls at this time, still a teenager, and it's believed he may have killed his first victim before turning 15. Police identified Watts as the attacker in the July 29, 1969 attack on 26-year-old Joan Gave when she was 15 years old. Watts knocked on Joan's apartment door while delivering his newspaper, and when she opened it, he attacked her severely. He carried on with his delivery route as if nothing had happened, with no remorse. Coral was arrested at his residence as a result of Joan's quick reporting of the incident to the authorities. He was then ordered to receive mental health care at a mental hospital in Detroit called the Lafayette Clinic. A psychiatric evaluation indicated a delusional thought process and a full-scale IQ of 75, indicating mild intellectual disability. He did poorly in school, but a police officer later said he was very, very intelligent and had a great memory. On November 7, 1969, Watts was discharged from the Lafayette Clinic. Watts received a football scholarship to Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee, after graduating from high school in 1973, despite having academic difficulties. After 3 months, though, he was expelled on charges of stalking and assaulting women. Watts' expulsion was also influenced by suspicions surrounding his ruthless killing of a female student. Even though there was not enough evidence to convict him, he moved to Houston, Texas after being expelled. Coral and his girlfriend Dolores Howard welcomed their daughter, Nikisha Watts, in 1979. Coral and Dolores, however, went their separate ways and broke up soon after her birth. Following that, Coral married Valeria Goodwill. Not long after they were married, Valeria saw that Coral was acting strangely. He broke candles, melted them on a table, rearranged furniture all the time, chopped up houseplants with knives, and strewn trash all over the floors without cleaning up after himself. Furthermore, he would abruptly depart after intimate moments, going missing for a few hours. Sadly, they were only married for 6 months. Although there are hints that Watts may have had more victims before this, his murders officially started in 1974, when he was 20 years old. After abducting his victims from their homes, he tortured them until he killed them. His victims were mostly slender, attractive white women between the ages of 14 and 44, and he struck in different states. Watts killed his victims by a variety of means, such as drowning, bludgeoning, stabbing, and strangulation. 10:45 a.m., Coral knocked on the door of Lenore Knizaki's apartment on October 25, 1974, saying she was trying to find Charles, one of his siblings. He carried on a conversation with Lenore. Coral asked if he could leave a note when she opened the door, the chain still fastened. He unexpectedly attacked Knizaki and strangled her until she passed out as she went to get paper. Lenore later called the police, but they couldn't find her attacker. Gloria Steele, 20, was thought to be Watts' second victim and was brutally murdered and tortured 5 days later on October 30, 1974. Gloria was a mother and a Western Michigan University student. She was discovered with 33 stab wounds to her chest from a wooden carving tool, as well as a crushed windpipe. Because there was insufficient evidence, Watts was not charged with direct murder. Diane K. Williams, an apartment resident manager and the sole witness, saw a black man looking for Charles throughout the apartment building. Coral grabbed her when she saw Williams, pried open her door, and pulled her inside. Williams' phone rang during their struggle, so she knocked it off the hook and yelled for assistance. Williams saw her assailant getting into a tan Pontiac Grand Prix as he ran away. Both Williams and Koniecki recognized Coral in a police lineup. Coral had been arrested for stealing plywood from the campus of Western Michigan University. On November 16, 1974, he was arrested and charged with assault and battery in connection with the Koniecki and Williams cases. Watts was moved to the Center for Forensic Psychiatry in Michigan after being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and attempting suicide with a length of cord at the Kalamazoo Mental Hospital. When asked about Gloria Steele's death in 1975, he confessed to attacking about 15 other young women and acknowledged being close to her the day before she passed away, but he denied being the cause of her death. Under a search warrant, Detroit police searched Watts' home and found a wooden carving tool, but no evidence connecting him to Gloria's death. Watts was given a year in the county jail after entering a no-contest plea during his trial for the assault and battery of Koniecki and Williams. When Watts was evaluated by psychologists, they described him as incredibly dangerous, lacking regret for his crimes, reckless, careless, emotionally distant, and prone to relapsing. Following that, he killed 5 women in a series of attacks that took place in the Detroit area over the course of a year. One odd finding was that most of his crimes took place on Sunday mornings. An Ann Arbor newspaper gave the offender the sinister moniker, Sunday Morning Slasher, because of this peculiar pattern, which added to the mystery surrounding the timing of these horrific attacks, which all took place at approximately 4 a.m. On April 20, 1980, Shirley Small, then 17 years old, was fatally stabbed twice outside her Ann Arbor, Michigan home. On July 13, 1980, 26-year-old Glenda Richmond was the target of a similar attack. Although there was not enough evidence in either case to convict, Watts' traits were evident. On September 14, 1980, 20-year-old graduate student Rebecca Huff was discovered dead after suffering about 50 stab wounds, the first murder that can be directly linked to Coral. On October 6, 1980, a 20-year-old named Delpy survived an attack, but he suffered serious injuries, such as muscle weakness and partial paralysis. Agnes, a 30-year-old woman, raised the alarm on her way back from a Halloween party on November 1, 1980, and barely avoided being attacked by a hooded man who looked like Watts. She recognized Watts from pictures, but there was still some doubt because of the dark surroundings. When Watts became the focus of local homicide investigators in July 1980, a task force was established to investigate the Sunday slashings. Watts was intermittently monitored, and in November, a court order permitted officers to equip his vehicle with a tracking device. Around 5 in the morning on November 15, 1982, Ann Arbor patrol officers were near Main Street when they noticed a suspicious man in a car following a woman as she walked home. When the woman realized she was being followed, she tried to escape by hiding in a doorway. When the police stopped Coral's car for having out-of-date license plates and driving with a suspended license, they arrested him because he was upset about losing sight of the woman. When police inspected his car, they discovered a package with several screwdrivers and wood-filling tools. The most important item they found was a dictionary that belonged to Rebecca Huff and had the carved words, "Rebecca is a lover." Despite this, there was not enough evidence to connect him to her murder. Coral moved to Columbus, Texas in the spring of 1981 and found work with an oil company. On weekends, he would make the more than 70-mile journey to his next hunting location in the Houston area. Watts murdered scores of women, including dozens, between 1974 and 1982. Watts avoided being identified as a serial killer for almost 8 years in spite of the long list of victims. This elusiveness was caused by multiple factors. The fact that Watts operated in multiple jurisdictions and even states made it more difficult to link the crimes. His method of operation also deviated from the norm because, in contrast to many other serial killers who prey on women and girls, He never had physical contact with his victims. As a result, connecting the crimes was difficult, even after DNA testing was developed. Law enforcement did not recognize Watts as a possible criminal until his arrest in 1982, and those who knew him did not view him as a suspect. Watts broke into the Houston apartment of Melinda Aguilar, then 18, and Lori Lister, then 21, on May 23, 1982. Watts strangled Lori down the steps outside the apartment after she returned from work. He then went into the apartment and strangled Melinda, who feigned unconsciousness. Melinda was able to avoid being fully strangled. Watts intended to drown Lori, so he wire-tied her hands behind her back. He filled the bathtub with water and carried Lori's body upstairs to the bathroom, but Melinda took advantage of the situation and jumped out of the window to get assistance. Watts first attempted to elude capture, but was caught, and Lori was saved. Investigators began connecting him to recent murders of women while he was in detention. Texas prosecutors felt there was not enough evidence to convict Watts of murder despite the connections. After Melinda Aguilar and Lori Lister were attacked, Harris County Assistant District Attorney Ira Jones negotiated a plea deal in May 1982. Watts would be charged with burglary with intent to murder in exchange for his complete admission of guilt and immunity from prosecution for murder. For this offense, he consented to a 60-year sentence. After Watts agreed to the terms, investigators found the remains of 3 victims. At last, Watts admitted to assaulting 19 women and killing 13 of them. While he acknowledged that he killed some victims, he did not confess to the deaths of others. His cases in Michigan, however, remained open after Michigan authorities refused to take part in the agreement. When the Texas Court of Appeals decided shortly after Watts' prison sentence that he had not been told that the bathtub and water he used to try to drown Lori Lister were deadly weapons, the hope for justice took a tragic turn. Due to this ruling, he was eventually granted early release and reclassified as a nonviolent felon. This was due to Texas law at the time, which allowed nonviolent felons to have 3 days taken off their sentences for each day they behaved well. As a model prisoner, Watts accrued time deductions that resulted in his potential release on May 9, 2006. There was little comfort in the early release law's subsequent repeal, which was brought about by public outcry because the Texas Constitution prohibited its retroactive application. As Michigan Attorney General Mike Cox looked for evidence to convict Watts of murder and stop his possible release in 2004, a call for justice reverberated across the country. Westland, Michigan resident Joseph Foy courageously came forward to describe the horrific scene of Watts-like man killing 36-year-old Helen Dutcher on December 1, 1970. 12 stab wounds had claimed Helen's life. Foy recognized Watts by his eyes, which he described as evil and emotionless in a haunting way. Michigan had no such agreement, even though Watts was exempt from prosecution for the 13 confessed murders in Texas. Law enforcement officials begged the trial judge to admit the Texas confessions into evidence as the 2004 trial drew near, and he agreed. Watts was found guilty of killing Helen Dutcher and Gloria Steele, and he was given 2 life sentences without the possibility of release in a Michigan jail. He was given a sentence on November 17, 2004, to serve his time in an Ionia, Michigan, maximum security prison. But a few years after this sentence started, on September 21, 2007, he died in a Jackson, Michigan hospital from prostate cancer. Ultimately, his dark story came to a somber conclusion when he managed to avoid serving his entire sentence for the lives he took. A vicious serial killer named Coral Eugene Watts terrorized the nation with his numerous murders. Despite his confessions, he was nearly released due to legal loopholes that allowed for a reduced sentence. The extent of his darkness was revealed by his subsequent conviction for Helen Dutcher's murder in 1979. In April 2379, Watts' legacy is haunted by the fact that he left the Ann Arbor murders unsolved, a terrifying reminder of hidden evil. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Brigitta Unto was close to passing away when she got to the emergency room. Despite the fact that her vital signs were rapidly declining, doctors were unable to identify any indications of infection or injury. Together, the police, FBI agents, and medical experts were able to solve the medical mystery and unearth a horrifyingly creative crime. The medical staff at a hospital in San Diego, California, waited for Brigitta, a 28-year-old patient, to arrive on March 5, 2018. An ambulance was taking her from the office of her family physician. Brigitta had called her mother Olga that day to complain of feeling ill. Brigitta's legs shook with agonizing pain, and she could hardly breathe. As Olga fought to get her into the car, the family doctor only needed to glance at the once vibrant and healthy young woman to realize that Brigitta was in serious trouble and that there was nothing he could do to help. In order to transport her to the hospital, he called an ambulance. The medics in the emergency room were also concerned because they thought they might not be able to stabilize her condition, and Brigitta was in excruciating pain, had no feeling in her hands or feet, could hardly see, and could hardly speak. The most perplexing symptom, however, was the clumping of her once beautiful chestnut hair. Immediately after starting their work, the doctors concluded that she had no visible signs of trauma, including no wounds, bruises, or infection. Her illness had an internal cause. According to Brigitta's mother, her daughter had been experiencing severe pain, exhaustion, and unexpected bouts of nausea for a number of months. She would spend days in bed because the symptoms would come on suddenly and without warning. It was difficult for Brigitta to care for herself, much less her husband and young son. She sought advice from several experts, but none of them could figure out what was wrong with her. There was no known illness that matched her symptoms. She was even told by one doctor that her condition was how critical days manifest. Ultimately, the doctors determined that stress was the cause and gave her tranquilizers. But her health deteriorated. The emergency department's medical staff recognized that she was in danger of dying within days if they didn't find out what was wrong with her quickly. Brigitta was raised in California, a short distance from the Mexican border. Her mother looked after their two daughters, Brigitta and her younger sister, Olga, while her father worked at customs between Mexico and the United States. The girls were raised in a loving and supportive household. Brigitta thrived academically while attending a Catholic school with joy. According to her friends, she was the sweetest and most amiable girl they had ever met. Running was Brigitta's passion, and she even represented her school in competitions. She met Race Remington Unto, her future husband, while running. Although Race went to a different school, they met in high school and shared a love of sports. Because Brigitta's daughter had no interest in dating boys, her family initially paid little attention to their friendship. She spent most of her time studying and playing sports, but over time, the young couple began dating and became more involved with one another. Race was able to bring out Brigitta's more daring side, and they quickly became inseparable. Race had a very lofty ambition. He wanted to enroll in the Annapolis-based United States Naval Academy. It was a difficult task because the student acceptance rate was less than 8%. In addition to doing well in school, the candidate had to work on personal growth, play sports, volunteer, be involved in the community, and much more. Remarkably, Race was accepted into the academy and relocated to Maryland to start his studies. The young couple kept up their long-distance romance. Race was eventually diagnosed with a hernia, though, which didn't fully heal. Despite having to leave the academy, he was able to find employment in the Navy as an electrician. Brigitta, meanwhile, went after her own goals and became a teacher. Following 7 years of dating, Brigitta, 25, and Race, 24, were married in 2014. They welcomed their son shortly after. Brigitta thought that everything in her life was going as planned, and she was completely content. She lived a short distance from her parents, had a wonderful child, and a loving, caring husband. She could never have predicted the extraordinary and agonizing turn her life would soon take, though. Dr. Jeff LaPointe, a certified toxicologist, was one of the emergency department doctors at San Diego Hospital. This was unusual. Like a great detective, Dr. LaPointe followed the trail of clues that might help him figure out what was happening to Brigitta. He was a true medical detective. Was an autoimmune disease killing her? No, that was not confirmed by blood tests. Is it possible that she has cancer? No. But among all the symptoms, hair loss was the most noticeable. This was a result of treatment rather than the illness. Brigida had been exposed to a toxic chemical, according to all the symptoms. But which one and how? It wasn't cesium, cadmium, or arsenic, because hair loss wouldn't be caused by these heavy metals. But thallium was the one material that could. Thallium was employed as a depilatory agent at the beginning of the 20th century. Additionally, doctors actively used it. For instance, if a child had lice on their head, thallium was applied to the lice, which caused the lice to fall off, along with all the hair. In the years that followed, thallium took center stage in rodent poisons. But by the 1970s, and arsenic had become so widely used as murder weapons that they were outlawed for use and sale. Leg pain, weakness, deteriorating vision, appetite loss, weight loss, and of course hair loss were all signs of thallium poisoning that Brigida was experiencing. Dr. Lapointe's inability to promptly verify his suspicions was the issue. There was no way to test the patient for poisoning on the spot, and no one in the hospital had ever seen a case like this before. The results would be available in 3 days, which Brigida might not have, and the samples needed to be sent to another lab. This was the start of the race against time. In order to get an expedited analysis, Dr. Lapointe began phoning each agency. The antidote would be desperately needed, even if the doctor's suspicions were confirmed and Brigida had thallium poisoning. But getting the antidote, which was aptly named Berlin Blue, proved to be more difficult than he could have imagined. Since Berlin Blue is a blue pigment used in paints, we have all seen it. When creating Starry Night over the Rhone, Vincent van Gogh used it. Additionally, it speeds up the body's removal of heavy metal poisoning by acting as an antidote. Though blue paint is available at the closest art supply store, it is nearly impossible to find medical-grade Berlin. Despite calling every pharmacy, naval medical officer, and clinic, Dr. Lapointe was only able to locate the antidote at one warehouse, a classified warehouse located in Los Angeles. In the event of a dirty bomb explosion, for example, Berlin Blue can also be used as an antidote to radiation exposure. Therefore, until thallium poisoning was verified in the lab, Dr. Lapointe could not rely on receiving the antidote because the government maintains exacting records of every tube of Berlin Blue in the nation. Lapointe's worst fears were validated when the toxicological analysis of Brigida's case was delivered. Brigida's body contained 1,000 times more thallium than was allowed. To transport the antidote to San Diego, a hospital employee drove through the night. But the doctor was concerned that one antidote might not be enough for such severe poisoning. In order to purify the patient's blood, he recommended dialysis. After a long and agonizing process, Brigida's family and the medical staff were left with nothing to do but wait and pray. To keep an eye on their health, Brigida's husband and son were moved to a different hospital wing. They might have been impacted as well if she had been exposed to thallium. Where could she have gotten so much thallium? That was still the key question. FBI agents were looking for the answer to that. Remember, this was all taking place in a state with multiple military installations. Additionally, President Trump's scheduled visit was the backdrop against which these events took place. As a result, FBI agents became very interested in what was going on in the city when Dr. Lapointe began searching for Berlin Blue. It was ultimately delivered so far away from the city that a local scientist for Harvard chemistry began searching for cocaine flu. When Brigida started having an unexplained illness, police and FBI agents found that she had been treated at an alternative medicine clinic in Mexico a few months prior. After looking into this lead, the police decided to ignore it. Because Brigida's school was a former World War II military installation, rodent poisoning may have happened there in the past. Many of the school's teachers became ill that year. This lead, though, also proved to be a dead end. Because Brigida was depressed, investigators could not rule out the possibility that she had used thallium herself as a cry for attention. She loved life, however, and would never desert her son, according to everyone who knew her. Furthermore, rather than the other way around, her depression developed after the emergence of inexplicable symptoms. Regarding the poisoning of his patient, Dr. Lapointe had his own suspicions. After scanning Brigida's internal organs, he was appalled to find a large number of white spots all over her digestive tract. It became clear that food was the entry point for the poison into her body. The ideal crime had been attempted by someone close to her. The patient was placed in total isolation by doctors, but food was the least of her worries at the moment. The antidote helped Brigida regain consciousness a few days later. She was unable to sit or move, and all of her hair had fallen out. But she was still alive. She was unable to identify anyone who would want to hurt her. Nonetheless, the police were aware that poisoning is always a private crime carried out by a close friend or relative. The fact that Brigida's husband and child were unharmed was also intriguing. Her husband, parents, and sister were all willing to assist with the investigation when the police spoke with them. Her husband, Race, complained that he was unable to put himself in his wife's shoes to ease her pain. Investigators sensed that he was lying, even though he said what they wanted to hear. Additionally, the medical staff observed that he asked odd and occasionally inappropriate questions and didn't seem as concerned. When her husband was suspected of being involved, Brigida became enraged and strongly denied it. She maintained that Race had taken care of their son and taken her to the hospital while she was ill, and when she didn't have the strength to get out of bed, he would cook. But what the investigators discovered during their chat with Brigida gave them the chills. Race had a rather peculiar pastime. He liked to gather rare poisonous plant seeds. After Brigida was hospitalized for 16 days, the police became interested in this and gathered enough information to search their house. Race, looking a little agitated, opened the door. He voluntarily turned over all of the family's devices, including laptops and phones, when the detectives asked him to. They were unable to ignore the fact that the device's entire search histories had just been erased. The police discovered 2 books, Criminal Poisoning and The Poisonous Handbook, despite the purportedly erased data on his phone. The Poisonous Handbook claims that thallium allows the poisoner to manipulate the rate at which their victim perishes. As the patient gradually deteriorates for unclear reasons, the poisoning manifests as a medical mystery. Race's vehicle yielded even more fascinating findings. In a tiny compartment in the spare tire, they discovered a packet of exotic seeds and an acetone canister. Additionally, just before the police arrived, their mother saw Race throw away a black garbage bag, which Brigida's sister handed over after retrieving it from the trash can. Receipts for exotic seeds, including cerebra dollar, prayer nuts, and tick seed, as well as a variety of equipment for grinding and filtering them, were found inside. Stated differently, everything required to produce rare poisons. The man had clearly already tried to crush tick seeds to extract ricin, a poison that is poisonous to mice but harmful to people if swallowed or inhaled. Although the detectives' suspicions increased, no thallium was discovered in the car, yard, or house. As a result, Race could not be arrested. They had no choice but to inform Brigida of their suspicions and request that she refrain from going home. Despite her continued incredulity, she did not object to the investigation's continuation. As they dug further, the investigators found a potential motive for the murder. One of Race's lovers thought he was a widower. He misled her by saying he was a Navy SEAL and that he wanted to work in the poisoning division of the FBI. Race led a double life, going so far as to have another affair and confessing to the woman that he was married. He didn't think twice about taking his young son on their dates, and the boy had become so attached to the woman that he called her mom. But in order to avoid having to share custody of their son, he wished that his wife would be struck by a bus. Why the woman wasn't alarmed by this is unknown. Even so, it was obvious that the man wanted to break up with Brigida. However, as a devoted Catholic, she had informed him prior to their marriage that she did not support divorce and that their union would be lifelong. Her unfaithful husband taking this ending so literally was not something she could have predicted. Race was asked to take a polygraph test by the detectives, but he failed horribly. He didn't try to deny the results when the polygraph examiner told him, and he admitted to everything. Race claimed that in August 2017, he placed 3 online orders for thallium. He started by making his wife a sandwich for breakfast in an effort to incorporate it into her meal. He used her weight to determine the thallium content. Brigida felt ill the following day, but it didn't kill her. She began to get better. Race increased the amount of thallium in the soup by a small amount in December of that year. Once more, he failed to get the desired result. He concealed the poison in a sandwich once more, in January, and increased the dosage 5-fold. He planned to murder Brigida in a few days. She started to lose her hair, felt awful, and was in terrible pain, but she persisted in fighting for her life. Race confessed and was taken into custody. He entered a guilty plea to 3 attempts to kill his wife 8 months later. His attorney attempted to claim that Race's judgment was impaired due to a spinal injury he sustained while serving in the Navy. This defense, though, was ineffective. He was given 3 life sentences, ranging from 21 years to life, on March 14, 2019. In October 2033, he might be eligible for parole. He will only be incarcerated for 14 years and be released before turning 42, if he is fortunate enough to be successful in his first attempt at freedom. Brigida finally had the opportunity to speak to her husband directly during the trial. She stated, "I wanted to believe that I knew the man I married 3 years ago, the man I had been dating for nearly 10 years. I wanted to believe that he would never harm me. I am horrified by the thought that he could be responsible for attempting to kill me. How could you do this to the mother of your child? Why do you think you have the right to decide that I am not a worthy mother for your son? How could you decide that the way to end our marriage is by slowly killing your wife, watching her suffer for months? I cared for you, and I loved you." Brigida gets cold sweats every time she thinks about the incident. She was lying in bed feeling ill. Her spouse brought her a peanut butter sandwich. Climbing onto the bed, their young son requested a bite. Race yelled at her to stop giving him any right away. Although Brigida is unsure if the sandwich contained thallium, she thinks her son was at least close to getting seriously poisoned. Brigida eventually got a divorce from Race, even though she was reluctant to acknowledge it. She continues to experience nerve damage, leg weakness, and persistent exhaustion. She is slowly getting better, though, and has resumed her job at a special education school. She acknowledges that finding a way to connect with each student is now much simpler for her. Once unable to walk, Brigida is now trying skydiving, running, and living life to the fullest. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Bryce Rhodes, 25, is the man you just saw on the screen. He acts in a reprehensible manner and shows no remorse or guilt for his actions. He is charged with the murders of 2 brothers, 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon, whose bodies were found after the authorities were alerted by a disturbing 911 call. Elizabeth Wren, their mother, was devastated by the news, and her entire world fell apart. However, the horrific manner in which her sons were murdered only served to exacerbate the suffering. Before their bodies were burned, they were repeatedly stabbed in the chest. The police had to stop Elizabeth from seeing her sons for the final time because it was so graphic. However, why would anyone commit such a heinous act? Bryce claims that the boys were aware of a secret of his that could endanger his life. What might that secret be? And why would it cause 2 young lives to end so horribly? And why did Bryce act so reprehensibly in front of the police? On the 4000 block of River Park Drive in the Shawnee neighborhood of West Louisville, on May 21, 2016, a 22-year-old girl was riding her bike past an old abandoned building. However, that day was different because she noticed something odd. The structure, which had appeared fine the day before, was now completely destroyed by fire. Curious about what had actually transpired there, she made the decision to look into it more. She noticed an odd shape that didn't seem to belong in the ruins of the burned-out building. Her heart raced with terror as she approached and realized it was a dead body. The surprises didn't stop there, though. She discovered another body nearby, both of them severely burned. She immediately called the police for assistance because she was so terrified. Police officers were soon swarming the scene, attempting to determine what enigmatic events had transpired there the previous evening. The police described the crime scene as the most horrific they had ever seen because it was so graphic. Even one of the officers felt so moved and compelled to shake his head in shock as he covered the 2 dead bodies with a white cloth because it was so unsettling. Pathologists hurried the bodies to the hospital for an autopsy. The remaining officers, meanwhile, remained at the scene and cautiously looked for any additional hints that might aid in their investigation. Following the autopsies, it was discovered that something even more heinous was the cause of death rather than the fire. A document made public by the coroner's office stated that both boys had been stabbed in the chest and had suffered severe blunt force trauma to their heads. The fact that they had already passed away hours before their bodies were burned and abandoned at the scene makes it even more horrifying. The police now had to identify the boys and determine why someone would hurt them in such a horrible way before they could start their murder investigation and collect evidence. The police were fortunate to be able to draw sketches of the boys despite the fact that the bodies were severely burned. The public was given access to these sketches, along with an appeal for anyone who might be able to identify them to come forward. However, they went beyond simple sketches. Unfortunately, they were unable to locate any missing persons reports that had been filed a few days prior and that fit the victims' descriptions after searching through their records. Despite Monday coming and going, no one came forward to identify the boys, and days went by. Elizabeth Wren, a worried woman, hurried to the police station the next day, May 23, 2016, when she informed the officers that the sketches they had made public featured her sons, 14-year-old Larry Ordway and 16-year-old Maurice Gordon. She was clearly nervous. When the officers broke the devastating news that her sons' bodies had been discovered fully burned, Elizabeth was taken aback. She was informed by the police that they suspected foul play and thought the murder was a well-planned one rather than a simple accident. The officers had to politely turn down Elizabeth's fervent wish to see her sons one last time. It would not have been suitable for a mother to see the bodies in such a terrible condition. Even though she felt completely powerless, Elizabeth mustered the courage to share an important piece of information. When Elizabeth spoke with the police, she described how her sons had told her that they were going out with some friends she had never liked on the evening of May 21, 2016. In the past, she'd tried to stop her sons from spending time with these friends, but they continued to do so. They went to a party that evening with 3 people, 25-year-old Bryce Rhodes, 15-year-old Anjuan Carter, and 17-year-old Ja'Cory Taylor. Elizabeth voiced her worries about Bryce, who had a concerning criminal record that included a number of serious crimes, including physical assault, domestic abuse, kidnapping, and even abuse. Elizabeth didn't worry too much because the boys assured her they would return soon, despite the fact that days had gone by with no sign of them. They would frequently go out to parties and not return home for days at a time. Therefore, she assumed it was just another instance of that kind. She had no idea, though, that this time would bring heartbreaking news that would permanently alter her life. The entire group was quickly located by the police. Anjuan Carter was promptly located and taken in for interrogation. They kept looking for Bryce in the meantime, and by Tuesday, May 24, 2016, they had also found him. In a brief period of time, Ja'Cory Taylor, another group member, was also captured that same day. While Bryce and Ja'Cory spoke separately with detectives regarding Larry and Maurice, they were detained by the police for hours. In an attempt to elicit information about the killings, the detectives showed Ja'Cory pictures of the 2 brothers' crime scenes in an attempt to frighten him. Ja'Cory, however, only claimed to be friends with the brothers and to have had no involvement in their deaths. However, Bryce persisted in telling the police that he didn't know the brothers' whereabouts and ultimately asked for legal assistance. The police changed their strategy after Ja'Cory and Bryce failed to provide any helpful information. They observed a shift in Anjuan's behavior during their individual interviews with him. Anjuan eventually talked about what had actually transpired on the evening of May 21 at that point. He clarified that evening, Bryce had summoned him and Ja'Cory to his apartment. There, Bryce told them his biggest secret, that he was afraid Larry and Maurice might tell the police about something they had seen on May 4, 2016. In order to get Ja'Cory and Anjuan to help him with a plan, Bryce was able to convince them to do something horrible, kill the brothers on the evening of May 21. Telling the brothers that Bryce was taking them to a party, Ja'Cory went to their house and persuaded them to come out. After a period of hesitation, Larry and Maurice consented to go along. They promised their mother, Elizabeth, that they would return later that evening as they left the house. Since his mother was out of town that weekend, the group had driven to Bryce's house, which he shared with her. Like any other party, the boys settled in and started hanging out and having a good time, but Larry and Maurice were unaware that something sinister was simmering in the background. Unexpectedly, a dispute erupted among the group, ruining the enjoyable party atmosphere. Ja'Cory accused the brothers of stealing money from Bryce, according to Anjuan, who told the police. Maurice became enraged when Ja'Cory confronted him about the theft. The whole situation escalated when Maurice felt threatened and sensed danger, reaching for a knife to protect himself and his brother. Jacori lunged in and took the knife away from Maurice when he saw him carrying it, according to Anjuan. After that, they both succeeded in subduing the brothers and belting them. To prevent either brother from defending themselves, they separated Larry and Maurice, leaving Larry in the bathroom while Bryce brought Maurice to his knees in the living room. Bryce insisted that Maurice ask for forgiveness, even though he pleaded for their lives. As Jacori and Anjuan watched Maurice tearfully plead for forgiveness in an attempt to protect himself and his brother from whatever was going to happen next, it was a tense moment. Bryce was unrestrained in his cruelty. He placed a blanket on the floor beneath Maurice, pulled stockings over his head, and stuffed a rag in his mouth. Then, in a startling display of violence, Bryce repeatedly stabbed Maurice in the chest and started beating him viciously. The graphic and horrifying scene in front of them frightened and unsettled the other teenagers who were watching. With his intimidating manner, Bryce intimidated the boys who were watching the horror and coerced Anjuan into giving Maurice a single stab wound to the chest. Anjuan reluctantly followed Bryce's orders and stabbed Maurice out of fear for his wrath. Anjuan went on to tell his terrifying story, revealing that after Maurice died, Bryce dragged Larry from the bathroom into the living room, where his brother's blood was all over the floor. Larry was devastated to learn that his brother was no longer alive. Bryce shifted his focus to Larry, pushing aside Maurice's lifeless body. Anjuan could still clearly recall Larry's agonized voice as he begged Bryce to spare him, but he was unsuccessful. Like his brother, Larry endured the same horrifying treatment. Before Bryce shockingly stabbed Larry 20 times in the chest, Anjuan could still hear his frantic cries. Bryce coerced Jacori into stabbing Larry by threatening him once more. Now that Maurice and Larry were dead, Bryce called a friend to help dispose of them and loaded their bodies into the car. Bryce left Anjuan and Jacori in the apartment to clean up the gory scene while he and his friend drove away with the brothers' lifeless bodies in the back seat. Bryce drove their dead bodies to an abandoned lot and burned them. Anjuan disclosed as he continued his confession. Maurice and Larry's bodies burned that fateful night as the flames consumed them. Fortunately, though, their bodies had not burned to ashes. The police eventually learned the terrible truth about Larry and Maurice's terrible demise after questioning Nguyen, but they still had unanswered questions. What was the brothers' relationship to Bryce, and what was the secret that brought the siblings such a terrible end? Despite being stepbrothers, Larry and Maurice had a close relationship and were just typical teenagers who loved life. However, things changed when they met Bryce in 2015, and they were immediately drawn to his laid-back demeanor. Bryce was a rapper who appeared extremely wealthy and successful in a number of music videos that were posted online. His charisma and way of life captivated Larry and Maurice, who quickly became enmeshed in his world. As they grew closer, Bryce introduced them to Jacori Taylor, a 17-year-old friend. A fourth teen, 14-year-old Anjuan Carter, joined the group as the three boys spent more and more time with Bryce. They all spent a lot of time with Bryce in 2015. He would take them places, buy them food and clothing, and even give them money to spend however they wanted. According to Jacori's police interview, Bryce used to assure them that if they followed in his footsteps, they would become famous. The boys appeared to adopt Bryce's gangster lifestyle more and more over time. They even made an appearance in a few of his music videos, which suggested that they were taking up his mindset. During this time, Elizabeth observed a shift in their conduct. Images of them smoking cigars, flaunting stacks of cash, posing with fictitious weapons, and featuring women began to flood their social media accounts. They also started going to parties frequently, sometimes staying out for days at a time. Late on May 4, 2016, they were making their way back from one of these parties. Maurice was driving Bryce's car at around 12:30 a.m., with Anjuan in a truck following them, Jacori in the passenger seat, and Bryce and Larry in the back. When Maurice noticed a man strolling on the sidewalk in the 800 block of South 43rd Street in Louisville, Kentucky, Bryce abruptly forced Maurice to apply the brakes. He struggled to recall where he had known him, but it quickly became clear that he was Christopher Jones, the 40-year-old man targeted by neighborhood gangs. However, Bryce made a grave error. He mistook Christopher for someone else, attempting to pick up the prize that had been placed on his head. It was such a mistake that it abruptly altered everything. Bryce jerked out his gun in a panic and fired a bullet from the car window into Christopher's chest. All of the teenagers were in disbelief as they saw a murder unfold before their very eyes as Christopher fell. Fearful and pumped with adrenaline, they drove as quickly as they could out of there without even pausing to think. Christopher was taken to emergency surgery after the shooting, but he tragically passed away during the procedure. Larry and Maurice couldn't get over the horror of what they'd witnessed for the next 2 weeks, even after Bryce had driven the boys home and told them not to speak about what had happened that night. They became uncomfortable around Bryce and began to avoid him more and more. Bryce, meanwhile, was experiencing anxiety as well. He was concerned that he would be in big trouble if the brothers told everyone about the shooting. Thus, on the evening of May 21, 2016, he decided to take their lives. Bryce made the terrible choice to kill 3 people in a short amount of time, all in self-defense. The repercussions of his actions, however, are now bearing down on him. Both Ja'Cory and Anjouan confessed to 3 charges of aiding and abetting murder and tampering with evidence after the interrogations. They were sentenced to 10 years in juvenile detention facilities because they were under the age of 18, with the remaining time to be spent in adult prisons after they reached the age of 18. They also had to testify against Bryce at his trial as part of their agreements. Bryce has ruined the court proceedings ever since he was taken into custody. The relatives of the victims believed he did it intentionally. He knew the prosecution wanted the death penalty, so they thought he was trying to stir up trouble. He reasoned that they might not execute him if he caused enough trouble and slowed down the procedure. Bryce did something startling at first. When he discovered that his court-appointed lawyer was friends with the victim's grandfather, he spat on him. Due to a conflict of interest, this created a significant issue and forced the lawyer to withdraw from the case. The court footage even shows the fight that broke out later between Bryce and the lawyer. Bryce even threatened to "see you when I get out." As a result, Bryce was forced to wear a spit mask and be restrained to his chair during subsequent court appearances. However, his behavior did not change despite these actions. He even threatened the judge and her family during one hearing. Bryce's courtroom antics continued after that. He frequently asserted that he didn't trust his lawyer and wouldn't allow them to speak for him. As a result, he even had 3 different state-appointed lawyers. It seemed as though he was adamant about doing things his own way, regardless of what other people thought. Following this court appearance in 2017, Bryce dug a hole in his cell in an attempt to break out of jail. Officers discovered the hole, though, along with a threatening note he had sent to Ja'Cory. "Rats get exposed," the note said. "This demonstrated Bryce's will to control even while incarcerated. Prove to me that you're not a rat." Another shocking incident that was caught on court video showed Bryce acting shamelessly as he was seen blowing kisses at the victim's mother. It was an unsettling demonstration of his lack of regret or shame for what he had done. The trial was repeatedly delayed, and Elizabeth was growing more and more irritated with Bryce's demeanor in the courtroom, as well as the delays. She had to leave the courtroom during one hearing because her emotions got the better of her. She later told reporters that she was still grieving over the loss of her 2 boys to this monster, even though she was attempting to find forgiveness through her faith. Her description of Bryce as ill and a demon made clear how deeply she felt pained and angry with him. Justice was finally done. In 2022, after Bryce's absurd actions and dramatic courtroom proceedings lasted for 6 long years, Bryce Rhodes was found guilty of killing 2 teenage brothers, Maurice Gordon, 16, and Larry Ordway, 14, by stabbing them and setting their bodies on fire. They allegedly saw him shoot and kill 40-year-old Christopher Jones in 2016, which prompted this horrific act. The jury also found Bryce guilty of 2 counts of abuse of a corpse and tampering with physical evidence, in addition to the 3 murder charges. The jury suggested a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the killings. They also proposed a 5-year sentence for evidence tampering and a 1-year sentence for each count of corpse abuse. Although Bryce was not eligible for the death penalty, his sentences will be served concurrently, meaning that unless his defense prevails in an appeal, he will be imprisoned for the remainder of his life. Deborah Wren, the grandmother of the teenage brothers, spoke tearfully about her memories following the verdict. The jury had to consider Bryce Rhodes' mental state during the trial in order to determine the appropriate punishment for him. According to psychologists consulted by the defense, Rhodes had an intellectual disability. They added that he had bipolar disorder and ADHD, but they felt he hadn't gotten the help or instruction he required to cope with these issues. The jury chose to side with the prosecution and the victims in spite of these arguments. How do you feel about the case? How did the teenage boys in the case become more vulnerable as a result of the absence of positive adult role models? What steps can be taken to stop future instances of violence and manipulation among young people who are already at risk? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. A terrible crime is depicted in the tragic events of November 28, 2014 in Fort Worth, Texas. An apartment complex resident named Ashlea Ann Harris, 31, was the target of a vicious and premeditated attack. The events that transpired on that fateful day raised troubling doubts regarding the motivation behind this barbaric deed. The incident started when a worried apartment complex resident called 911 on December 12th. Having called day 1 on a telephone, she called day 209. Emergency personnel hurried to the scene after they reported a fire in one of the units. The fact that this incident would turn into a murder investigation was unknown to them. The apartment was occupied by Ashlea Ann Harris when it caught fire. Nobody was able to verify at first whether Ashley was in the burning apartment. Firefighters fought the fire with courage and were able to contain it. The terrible truth was revealed only after the fire was extinguished. Since Ashley had been in her apartment the entire time, police concluded that the fire was not an accident because of Ashley's body. Ashley had been severely beaten, as evidenced by the pool of blood surrounding her lifeless body. Her ankles suffered the same fate as her hands, which were brutally bound with duct tape, leaving her helpless. There were more indications of violence. Her body was scarred by burns, and she had endured the pain of strangulation. Moreover, her throat had been brutally cut, adding to the horror. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that this was a carefully thought out and horrifyingly carried out murder, rather than merely a tragic accident or an isolated act of violence. After committing this horrible crime, the evidence suggested that someone had purposefully set the apartment on fire. The offender had also sprayed rubbing alcohol on Ashley's bed and other parts of her apartment, seemingly in an effort to cover up any evidence of their actions. But the horrific reality had not been hidden by the fire. The case's apparent lack of motivation was one confusing feature. Since Ashlea's keys were the only item missing from her apartment, investigators were left wondering, what could motivate someone to attack an innocent woman in such a vicious and heartless manner? As law enforcement looked for answers, justice, and closure for Ashlea Ann Harris's bereaved family, the murder investigation would surely be a difficult and heartbreaking one. The police started looking for answers. Interviews with Ashley's neighbors marked the start of their adventure. One of them, Stephen Lee, lived in an apartment next door. He described an odd sighting at around 6:30 a.m. that fateful morning. He was smoking a cigarette on his balcony when he spotted an unknown car parked close by. The car in question was a sleek black Infiniti G35, which was unusual in their peaceful neighborhood. This observation would turn out to be a key clue in the mystery that was developing. But Stephen Lee's story wasn't the only piece of the puzzle. At around 7:30 a.m., Ashley's neighbor Patrick Sweet, who lived directly below her apartment, told the police a terrifying revelation. A spine-tingling scream reverberated from above, startling and upsetting Patrick as he was startled out of his morning routine. After that, he heard a number of disturbing sounds, such as what sounded like a heavy thud and frantic, gasping breaths. He was terrified, but his carbon monoxide detector's blaring alarm was what finally got him to act. He became aware that a fire was occurring, so he quickly called 911 to solve the mystery of Ashley's disappearance. Ashley was employed as an assistant manager at an American Eagle store in the Hulen Mall, and the police painstakingly tracked her movements on the day in question. Their investigation revealed that she had eaten dinner in one of the apartments in their complex on Thanksgiving Day with her close friend Alexis Torres and a group of acquaintances. After dinner, Ashley went to work, The Black Friday sales craze during Ashley's work shift made for a long and exhausting evening. Alexis kindly volunteered to watch Ashley's cherished dog, Nala. Ashley is back at home. Was marked by the early morning. At approximately 3:15 a.m., Alexis visited briefly before leaving after 4 a.m. The timeline started to become crucial to the investigation at this point. According to the police, Ashley died suddenly between 4:15 and 7:30 in the morning. Because of this crucial period, the authorities were keen to find and talk to the owner of the enigmatic black Infiniti G35 in order to provide insight into what happened during those hours. After discovering the black Infiniti G35, the police made the decision to interrogate Alexis, Ashley's friend. She said she didn't know who owned the car. They are intrigued, though, by a tip from Christopher "Chris" Cravey, Ashley's boss. He told the police that he knew a woman named Carol Cervantes, who was a driver of one of these vehicles. The plot twist was that Carter had been fired in August after having previously worked at Ashley Leah's American Eagle store. The police began monitoring Carter's home after obtaining this lead. The following Saturday morning at 8 a.m., their patience paid off when they saw Carter leave her apartment and get into her Infiniti G35 with a man. After that, the man drove her to Hulin Mall, where he parked after dropping her off at the entrance. When the police came to question him, they found that he was actually Clarence, Carter's boyfriend. David Mallory, who used to work at the same American Eagle store, became suspicious when Clarence was unable to provide his driver's license when asked, which resulted in his arrest. Officers observed some odd details about him while he was at the police station. The plastic price tag fastener was still on his brand new ski mask, which showed no signs of wear. In addition, his lower lip, which was visibly swollen even after Clarence was arrested, looked like a recent injury. Despite being seen entering the mall, Carter was never seen again. Instead, she was apprehended at her apartment complex, where she appeared to be doing laundry and taken in for interrogation. Her initial claim that she had not left the apartment complex that day was refuted by surveillance footage, which showed her leaving the mall and making her way home. According to the police, she may have decided to walk the 2 miles home after spotting them conversing with Clarence in the mall parking lot. Notably, they noticed minor scratches on her arms as the puzzle pieces came together. The police had to determine whether Carter and Clarence were involved in Ashley's terrible death, and if so, what the motivation was for the gruesome events that had taken place. A troubling picture of the circumstances leading up to Ashley's untimely death was painted by additional evidence that surfaced. An important turning point in the investigation was when Ashley's missing keys were found, since it turned out that they also provided access to the American Eagle store where she worked. Given that Ashley's keys could open the store safe, the police concluded that Carter and Clarence had planned Ashley's murder. Stealing what they thought was tens of thousands of dollars, presumably amassed from Black Friday sales, seemed to be the crux of their evil scheme. Armed with Ashley's keys, they carried out their plan on a fateful Saturday morning, but when they got to the store, they ran into an unforeseen problem. Their attempt at robbery was foiled by the fact that the locks had already been changed. Additional incriminating evidence was discovered during the search of Carter and Clarence's apartment. They discovered a taser box, a plastic tub with bungee cords and a rope, a lock in a kitchen drawer, and some discarded duct tape. They also found a broken deadbolt lock, 2 more locks that looked like they were used for practice and were marked as lock-picking practice locks, and the black Infiniti G35, a key vehicle in the investigation, which also had sinister secrets inside. They found a plastic bag inside a black garbage bag, a sharpening stone that was probably used for a knife, a 9mm cartridge, a cell phone, a walkie-talkie, and a sheathed buck knife. Notably, they also discovered a kitchen knife, an unopened tarp, and a toboggan with a hole cut in it. The finding was perhaps the most concerning. 3 of a loaded Glock 19 concealed beneath the driver's seat with a bullet in the chamber. The disturbing picture of Carter and Clarence's role in Ashley's murder was painted by these strong pieces of evidence. The state decided not to pursue the death penalty after both defendants were charged with capital murder. Instead, it sought life in prison without the possibility of release for both of them. Carter and Clarence upheld their not guilty pleas in spite of the overwhelming evidence against them, paving the way for a torturous court battle that would ultimately decide their fate. Although the prosecution gave both defendants a largely consistent story, the court cases of Carter, Carol Cervantes, and Clarence, David Mallory, developed independently. But after Carter's case was heard, attention turned to proving that she was the alleged mastermind of the crime. The prosecution believed that Carter and Clarence had several reasons for wanting to hurt Ashlia. First, they thought the two wanted Ashlia's keys, which would allow them to enter the store safe and the large amount of money they assumed was kept there, especially after the Black Friday sales. The prosecution also claimed that Carter and Clarence wanted to exact revenge on Ashley. An additional layer of personal animosity was introduced into the situation when they blamed her for their dismissal. The court proceedings explored the individuals' personal histories. In June 2014, Ashley took over as store manager while her boss, Chris, was on medical leave. An important part of the operation had been played by Carter, the store's assistant manager. Notably, on August 24, 2014, she had also employed Clarence, her boyfriend, to work with her at the same place. A sizable amount of $18,000 inexplicably vanished from the American Eagle store's safe. When Ashlia, who was in charge of locking the store that evening, noticed that the back door had been left open, suspicion was cast on Carter. Clarence was identified in surveillance footage as the person who had broken into the safe and stolen the cash. This finding signaled the start of a series of events that would ultimately result in a tragic conclusion. Chris, Ashlia's boss, didn't find out that Carter had employed Clarence until after the theft. It was shocking to learn that Clarence had a history with the American Eagle brand, having worked at an Amarillo store. However, his record in the American Eagle system was marked as non-rehirable, meaning he should not be employed at any American Eagle location. Chris revealed something shocking. In order to evade detection and get around any warning signs, Carter had changed Clarence's name and social security number in the system and manipulated his personnel file. This information implied a troubling degree of Carter and Clarence's collusion. It became clear as hostilities increased that Carter and Clarence had been plotting Ashley's kidnapping and key retrieval. Images of Ashley's apartment, her apartment door, and her car were among the incriminating evidence found on their cell phones. On their cell phones, police also found latitude and longitude coordinates. The terrifying story was further enhanced by Detective Cedillo's testimony, which disclosed that one of Clarence's texts included coordinates that, when entered into Google Earth, identified a location close to Lufkin, Texas. Detective Cedillo discovered a terrifying hole at this location that was 6 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. It looked grimly like a grave for a human. The prosecution argued that the original plan was to kidnap Ashlia, threaten her with a pistol, and then kill her somewhere else. But when Ashley refused to let them into her apartment, their plans took a sinister turn, and she tragically died there. More disturbing evidence surfaced. 2 shovels, a box of plastic sheeting, and a box of Craftsman sockets were found by police when they searched Clarence's Cadillac, indicating a sinister and planned motive. These disclosures presented an unsettling image of a well-thought-out crime in which Carter and Clarence were purportedly driven by retaliation as well as financial gain. As the trial went on, the prosecution called witnesses who provided more insight into the terrible circumstances surrounding Ashlia's passing. Jeff Kaiser, Ashley's close friend and neighbor, was one such witness. Jeff described the terrifying morning when he was startled awake by the sound of fire alarms, recognizing that Ashley's apartment was in danger, and he acted quickly after noticing her car was still parked outside. He hurried upstairs without thinking and kicked down Ashley's apartment door with courage. When Jeff walked in, he saw a chaotic scene. The apartment was filled with smoke, and the sprinkler system sprayed water, making the place dangerous and confusing. Even though it was dangerous, Jeff tried to crawl toward the kitchen to get to Ash, but the dense smoke soon overpowered him and he had to back off to get some fresh air. Unfazed, he made 2 more heroic attempts, but the smoke was too thick to handle. Luckily, rescue efforts were taken over by firefighters who had already arrived on the scene. Arson investigator Wallace E. Hood Jr. offered crucial information about the fire's cause. He stated in his testimony that he was able to pinpoint several places where the fire started, including Ashley's bed and the closet. One particularly unsettling discovery was the smoke detector's purposeful removal and hiding under the mattress. These discoveries suggested a malevolent and deliberate act meant to hide the fire and make Ashley's chances of surviving even more difficult. With a string of gripping incidents and testimony, The courtroom drama went on. The prosecution showed surveillance footage taken in front of the American Eagle store on November 29 at around 2 in the morning, which showed an enigmatic individual trying to operate the gate lock. The prosecution claimed it was Carter, but the person's face was hidden. The altered locks made it impossible for them to unlock and raise the gate, despite their obvious attempts. This implied that Carter might have had plans involving the crime or the store. Unaware that the police were observing them, Carter and Clarence returned to the mall at 8 a.m. that same day, the court was informed. Given the previous unsuccessful attempt to enter the store, this raised concerns about their intentions and behavior. In the parking lot of the mall, Clarence was taken into custody. He told the police that Carter had gone inside to get some documents. Carter was not present in the mall when the police searched it, though. Suspicions regarding her movements and activities were raised when she was eventually found at her apartment complex. Important details regarding Ashley's injuries were supplied by Dr. Richard Fries, a deputy medical examiner at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office. The extent of her physical trauma was graphically depicted by the autopsy. Among Ashley's many wounds were cuts to her cheek, scalp, and left side of her face. Her chin was scraped, her lip had laceration and scrape marks, and her right side was marred by a patterned bruise, with additional bruises discovered around her left eye and between her eyes. The most unsettling finding was probably a star-shaped cut behind her left ear with a bruise surrounding it, which the medical examiner determined was the result of a pistol blow. The testimony described Ashley's experience in a distressing way, implying that she had been beaten viciously and savagely. Ashley sustained multiple wounds, including a knife wound to her neck, bruising and abrasions to her right arm, chest, and neck. Ashley suffered multiple blows to her face, according to testimony from Dr. Fries, a witness in the case. Additionally, he mentioned that Ashley's eyes had patachi, which suggested that she might have been strangled or suffocated. Dr. Fries clarified that a fractured cricoid, a neck cartilage, is more frequently linked to severe force or auto accidents and is rarely observed in asphyxia or strangulation cases. Ashley's death was ruled a homicide after he determined that she died from asphyxia and blunt force trauma to her head and neck. Carter's trial was surrounded by a compelling and heartbreaking courtroom drama. The foundation of her defense was the claim that she was not responsible for Ashley's untimely death. She bravely removed the layers of fear and manipulation that had surrounded her life by taking the stand to testify in her own defense. Carter's testimony portrayed Clarence as a domineering and dangerous man, painting an unsettling picture of their relationship. She disclosed that he had a terrifying amount of control over her day-to-day activities, including deciding when she was allowed to eat and drink, as she admitted to trying to rob the American Eagle store. The entire courtroom listened intently, but she maintained that Clarence's threatening words were what forced her to commit this crime. She told of the terrifying time he pulled out a gun and gave her the order to steal. To make matters worse for her, he claimed that if she refused to accept the money, a dangerous threat would be waiting outside her parents' house, threatening their lives. Carter's story took a darker turn when she described a horrific experience in which she was raped by 2 unidentified men. She claimed that Clarence himself had allowed these attackers to enter her apartment, and she had to endure the unspeakable cruelty of their acts. Carter adamantly insisted that Ashley was innocent on the fateful night of her murder. She testified that she was asleep in her bed and did not know where Clarence was at the time. She strongly denied any role in Ashley's death and firmly stated that she was not involved in the tragic incident. In a remarkably quick decision that took only 2 hours, the jury remained skeptical despite Carter's compelling testimony and returned a guilty verdict. Carter was given a life sentence without the chance of release as a result. That was not the end of the case. Clarence also appeared in court, arguing that he was innocent of Ashley's murder, but the same lack of response was given to his claims. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, just like Carter, after the jury, clearly unimpressed by his claims, found him guilty as charged. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The tragic death of Barbara Faye Villarreal occurred in Garland, Texas, on November 7, 1986. A large kitchen knife was found embedded in her body after she was brutally stabbed and murdered in her own home. There were bloodstains all over the crime scene, which was horrifying and gory. Despite detectives' efforts, the case remained unsolved for almost 40 years. The killer had been hiding in plain sight, leaving a trail of unsolved questions until 2023, when advances in DNA technology revealed the truth. What sinister motives drove Barbara's horrific fate, and who was the mastermind behind it? You'll be amazed at the response. Let's examine the specifics. Garland is a city with a tale of resiliency and hope located in the center of the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. The city was named in honor of Attorney General Augustus H. Garland and was established in 1887 as a result of the merger of Duck Creek and Embry. Garland eventually became Dallas County's third most populated city. However, there were difficulties along the way. The city, which is in Tornado Alley, had one of its worst days in May 1927, when a terrible tornado ripped through the streets, killing 17 people and leaving a path of destruction in its wake. Even though the city was brought to its knees, its spirit was unwavering. A feeling of solidarity and resilience surfaced as the residents of Garland rebuilt their homes and lives. They banded together and helped one another through the difficult times. One family's joy and love served as an example for others. They were so cherished and admired by everyone that nobody could have predicted the heartache that would soon ensue. Everyone was delighted by Barbara's radiant smile. Her family's love was evident and strong, and her presence brightened the space. However, life had other ideas, and this family would soon experience a tragedy that would upend their entire way of life. On December 23, 1958, Barbara Faye Villarreal was born in Peru, Indiana. She was the youngest of her mother's first marriage's 4 children. Barbara suffered a terrible loss when her father died when she was a little child. The family circle grew after her mother remarried and had 2 more children. 12 Mile, a tiny community a few miles north of Peru, Indiana, was where Barbara grew up. She was surrounded by warmth and love there, which helped to mold her into the kind and sympathetic person she is today. Her early years were characterized by adventure, laughter, and a strong sense of familial values. She loved the little things, like swimming in the local lake and riding her bike to her grandparents' corner store to buy candy. Her extended family, which included many cousins with whom she enjoyed sharing recipes and making memories, was always present on Sundays and holidays. At home, Barbara loved spending time with Kami, her faithful Pomeranian friend. As she matured into a young woman, her compassion, warmth, and understanding nature became increasingly apparent. Her heart was always willing to lend a helping hand to others, and her radiant smile could light up any space. Barbara married Domingo Diaz Villarreal on February 25, 1979, and the two of them created a life full of promise, love, and laughter. Barbara had made a name for herself in the accounting division of DeGolyer and McNaughton in Dallas, Texas, by the time she turned 27. She and Domingo settled in Garland, where they were surrounded by friends and neighbors in the 3600 block of Colbath Street. One of them was Barbara's best friend, Lisa Nugent, who loved her for being a kind, considerate, sweet, and wonderful person in general. A feeling of unease descended upon the tiny New Mexico town of Lovington on the evening of November 7, 1986. In stark contrast to the horror taking place inside the Villarreal residence, the sky was a serene shade of pink and orange. Domingo Villarreal was standing at a neighbor's door at 8:52 p.m., his hands shaking, his eyes wide, and his voice trembling. Slightly lucid from shock, he begged for assistance. "There's a problem with Barbara," he managed to say. After the neighbor promptly dialed 911, emergency personnel reached the location in a matter of minutes. The house was illuminated by the flashing lights of the police cars and ambulances that occupied the street. Officers entered and were greeted by a sight that chilled them to the bone. Barbara was brutally stabbed several times, and a large kitchen knife was still embedded in her body as she lay lifeless on the floor. As a brutal reminder of the evil that had killed her, the knife appeared to mock the scene. In his first statement, Domingo claimed that 2 men had broken into their house, bound him, and pulled Barbara into a different room. He stated that when Barbara's screams shattered the night air, he was in the backyard. She was being held captive by 2 armed men when he hurried inside. Barbara was led to a different room by one man, and Domingo was able to flee after the other man made him perform a sexual act at gunpoint. The police listened carefully, but every second that went by made them more skeptical. Domingo's face looked emotionless and his story sounded scripted. Fueled by doubts and questions, the investigation got underway. What actually took place that fateful evening? Did Domingo commit the crime or was he a victim? Although paramedics responded quickly, Barbara's injuries were obviously serious. Although it was later discovered that she had been dead for more than an hour prior to their arrival, she was declared dead at 9:50 p.m. The full scope of the horror was disclosed in the medical examiner's report. She had numerous stab wounds all over her body, each of which was a testament to the attacker's violence and rage. An investigation into a homicide was started. For the Garland Police Department, the initial investigation into Barbara Villarreal's murder was a difficult and complicated procedure. It was evident as soon as they got to the crime scene that this case would call for painstaking attention to detail and unwavering resolve. With furniture overturned and personal belongings strewn all over the floor, the house was in a state of chaos that suggested a violent struggle. Several areas had bloodstains, indicating Barbara had put up a valiant fight against her assailant. To record the scene, investigators collected blood samples, removed fingerprints from different surfaces, and took a ton of pictures. A big kitchen knife that was thought to have been used in the murder was sealed as evidence and sent for forensic analysis. Nevertheless, the technology available at the time made it difficult to draw firm conclusions from the evidence. It simply wasn't adding up. Something was missing. Police interviewed a large number of neighbors, friends, and family members in the days after the murder. Barbara was described by close friends and family as a loving, kind person who had no known enemies. Nonetheless, some claimed she had been involved in a few family conflicts, which made police wonder if there might have been a personal motivation for the crime. As investigators continued their investigation, they discovered startling information about the family. Although many saw Barbara and Domingo as a happy couple, others witnessed them fighting regularly and dealing with serious problems. Their relationship was viewed differently by those who knew them. At first, the police thought Domingo might be a murderer. He was exonerated following a rigorous interrogation, but the investigation came to a standstill because Domingo was no longer a suspect. They had no additional suspects, no evidence, and no fresh leads. The investigation stalled, and the police had no idea what to do next. A faint blood trail discovered outside the house was the only hint, but it didn't belong to Barbara or Domingo. Detectives were left wondering who could have committed such a horrible crime, because this enigmatic blood was the only indication that a killer was present. The loss devastated Domingo and Barbara's family. They struggled to find peace, as the graphic picture of her death tormented them. Fearing that anyone could be the victim of such a horrible crime, the community was also rocked. The suffering and uncertainty were exacerbated by the lack of answers. It took a pivotal discovery to reveal the truth about her untimely death, so the case remained a mystery. It was challenging for investigators to make meaningful progress because of the dearth of eyewitnesses and hard evidence. Blood samples provided no useful information, and fingerprints taken from the crime scene did not match anyone in databases that were currently in use. The police were left with a number of unsolved questions and dead ends. The case started to lose steam as the weeks stretched into months. The investigation's initial enthusiasm faded, and it encountered many difficulties. Despite their continued cooperation with the police and their intense desire for answers, Barbara's family's optimism for a speedy resolution started to fade. The case was never entirely dropped, even though there was no progress. Regular reviews were carried out by the Garland Police Department, which went over the evidence again and spoke with important witnesses again. The case was still unresolved, though, and there were no fresh leads or discoveries. 2 years later, in 1988, Domingo lost his life in a shootout in Mexico, bringing tragedy once more. Detectives learned a startling fact after his death. Domingo Villarreal had been using a stolen identity. Fingerprint analysis revealed that his true identity was Jesus Canales. Barbara's parents told police in 1994 that weeks after the murder, Jesus Canales had called them from Mexico and said he had killed one of the victims and was pursuing the other, Liborio Canales of Rodeo, Mexico. Domingo was charged with orchestrating Barbara's murder with the assistance of 2 family members, but because there was insufficient evidence, police were unable to draw any firm conclusions. Detectives also spoke with a neighbor who claimed to have discovered Domingo in her kitchen a month prior to the murder. Later, she realized her kitchen knife was gone. She verified that the missing knife was the same one when detectives showed her a picture of the murder weapon. The Villarreal case became one of many unsolved murders as the years went by. The police department, however, was adamant about solving the case and refused to give up. Public assistance was requested through media appeals. The investigation was given a much-needed boost when a cold case team was brought in to offer new insights and creative expertise. Every tip, no matter how small, was followed by the police department, which worked tirelessly. Over the years, Garland police detectives and the FBI followed up on a number of leads in Mexico and the United States, officials said. However, no noteworthy discoveries were made until 2022. A major development in 2022 was brought about by advances in DNA technology. Detectives were able to re-examine the evidence with new eyes thanks to this creative tool, which gave the investigation new life. Investigators were able to use extensive public genetic databases to find possible relatives of the suspect through investigative genetic genealogy, which blends DNA testing with conventional genealogical research. Detectives could gradually identify the criminal by comparing DNA samples taken from the crime scene with these databases. The potential reward was huge, but the process was time-consuming. Barbara's family and everyone else who had suffered the loss of a loved one to violence had hope because this potent tool had already solved a number of cold cases across the country. Police reopened the Villarreal case in 2022. The case was about to take a drastic turn, and the possibilities seemed endless with the development of DNA technology. Now, investigators could examine small samples, make connections between disparate pieces, and find buried clues. The Garland Police Department used cutting-edge DNA technology to solve the long-standing mystery in 2023, a year filled with revelation. Surprisingly, a DNA sample from the crime scene was matched to Liborio Canales after police retested every sample. Investigative genetic genealogy, which followed Canales' family tree and helped identify him as the suspect, made this discovery possible. An incredible twist came to light after more research. Domingo Villarreal had a brother named Liborio Canales. Even more startling was the fact that Jesus, Domingo had never told Barbara or the police that he had a brother. Liborio Canales was taken into custody by the Lovington Police Department on Tuesday, July 18, 2023, without any opposition. On a federal murder warrant, he was arrested and checked into the Lea County Detention Center. It was found by the police that he had left the country 2 days after killing his sister-in-law, Barbara. He had come to the United States from Mexico to celebrate his birthday with his family, not realizing that he was being pursued by police, which is why his arrest was successful. Authorities in New Mexico and the Garland Police Department worked together to make the arrest. Investigators had been following Canales around, and they quickly caught him when he crossed the border. Canales was taken into custody without incident and did not resist arrest. After that, he was taken for additional interrogation and processing. Liborio Canales eventually broke under the strain of interrogation and admitted to the horrible crime that had remained unsolved for almost 40 years. He came clean about the shocking reality of what actually transpired on that fateful day, because the weight of his secrets had become too much to bear. Canales claims that a family argument that had gotten out of hand was the driving force behind Barbara's heinous murder. Even though the specifics of the conflict are still unknown, it is clear that tension had been rising for a while before a tragic altercation. Authorities were able to assemble the evidence and create a compelling case against Canales thanks to his confession. Later, he was accused of killing Barbara. The legal proceedings proceeded swiftly because of his advanced age and the overwhelming evidence against him. Canales would ultimately be held accountable for his deeds, providing Barbara's family with closure and the community with justice. Given the seriousness of the accusations, the judge set Canales' bond at $1 million. After being deported to Texas, Canales was subjected to additional legal proceedings. An important first step toward taking responsibility for his actions was his booking into the Dallas County Jail on August 18. Canales received a 20-year prison sentence, after his extradition and booking. This sentence probably means he will be incarcerated for the rest of his life because of his advanced age. After waiting for justice for almost 40 years, Barbara's family felt a sense of closure after the sentencing. The case demonstrated how crucial cold case units are, and how DNA technology can be used to solve even the most difficult cases. It also gave families of other unsolved crimes hope. According to Barbara's mother, the way the Villarreal case was resolved had a big influence on how investigations were conducted. The Barbara Villarreal case serves as an example of the effectiveness of tenacity and creativity in criminal investigations. Through the unwavering efforts of law enforcement and the revolutionary potential of DNA technology, a cold case that appeared destined to go unsolved was turned into a tale of justice. The knowledge gained from this case will continue to direct and motivate those committed to cracking cold cases and providing closure to families as we move forward. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.